Welcome to the FilmGamer podcast, episode 19 of season 3, 26 overall. Let's do this. I am going to rank on this episode 50 or maybe 49. Let's do 49 because I don't want to watch Priscilla. Of the top A24 films that I've seen. A24 is an interesting culture because it's a distribution company in independent film backed by some rich folks. It's based in New York, and it's kind of the hip, cool film company. Although in the 10 years since it's been around, they didn't have a number one film until now, and now they have a lot of competition. Nonetheless, they are valued at $1 billion or so. So good for them. They found their niche, and they are protecting it now with their number one film, Civil War, which I will go over the box office of in this week's episode. And I'll also give my review on Fallout, the full review. And let's get into it. This is the Film Gamer podcast. Okay, so what I'm going to start with is my review, actually, of the Fallout television series, which I've covered in written form on filmgamer.com, filmgamer.ca, and also filmgamer.net. Although, who uses filmgamer.net? The .nets, I don't know why they do it the way that they do it, but nonetheless, I digress. I gave Fallout a 6.9 out of 10. It's an 8-episode series. It's kind of the show that I would prefer to have like 22 episodes, which is what I'm going for. And I understand that 22 is a lot, and that's a lot of budget to stretch over the $153 million they got to make this show. But come on, if anything can afford itself the latitude of 22 episodes or show, it's Fallout, okay? Like, the Fallout New Vegas, which in the series is, I would say, my favorite. I put about 96 hours into playing this game. That is more than I have played any other game, except, or maybe on par with the Outer Wilds, sorry. But winding the clocks back, in 2008, Fallout 3 burst onto the gaming scene in the golden age of gaming. That's the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, Nintendo era. And despite like an aging graphics engine, because I remember looking at the graphics and thinking, wow, this is old. Despite being new, how could it possibly be so fun? It basically took the RPG mechanics, which were popular by Japanese RPGs and the like, and put a gun in your hands and westernized it. And it has a captivating premise, insightful commentary, and basically became a modern classic. And now the TV series, spearheaded by Westworld creator Jonathan Nolan, who co-wrote with his brother, the Dark Knight trilogy, Christopher Nolan, and he came to Amazon. The first series he made with them actually was The Peripheral, which I haven't seen, but nonetheless, he made that show, which starred Chloe Grace Moretz. And Chloe Grace Moretz worked on Kick-Ass 2 with Ella Purnell, the lead of this show. So I wonder if there's any, talking to, and that's how they got the series or how they knew each other. But nonetheless, Amazon canceled The Peripheral, and they still must have had a deal with them, so they decided to make Fallout their next show. And let me tell you, this series perfectly captures the essence of playing the game, for better and for worse. Even though it introduces like completely new settings and characters, it's the most one-to-one creation of game to television show, or movie for that matter, that I've seen. The downside is that all of the junk of the series comes with it. So the series is well paced and visually compelling. It is meticulously faithful to, the ambience of the game, reflected in its music choices and production values. You hear the theme, it's perfect. All of the licensed songs are perfect, many of which play in the game. However, it suffers, like the games, from narrative sluggishness. So while players of the game may be accustomed to its open world format, where the main quests sometimes take a back seat to exploration, the television adaptation employs that narrative drift to less creatively satisfying ends. In short, it just kind of loses momentum when the threat surrounding the mysterious Enclave scientist Siggy Wilzig, played by Michael Emerson, who's always a fantastic weird presence, dissipates. He kind of drifts out of the picture, and then the narrative loses focus. But it's still, again, visually compelling and interesting world to be in. Really, one of the most interesting worlds I've seen in a while in a series, and it just kind of goes to show how starved people are for something like this, that it's become, at least across my For You page and whatnot, a big hit. This show has three characters: a ghoul, a Brotherhood of Steel member named Maximus, and Lucy McLean, who's a vault dweller. Um, but after, the first three episodes, there's less downward pressure on these characters to complete their journey, and the side quests aren't as fun this time. Um, so, although the creator of Westworld is a good fit for the gaminess of this material, fun isn't exactly his forte. So, they have a few great guest roles for actors like Chris Parnell, who is on Archer, and Fred Armisen of Saturday Night Live. They also have, Michael Rappaport, who shows up, and a few others. The show is never as fun or funny as it should be because it seems like it's shackled with too much baggage. Like, it has to explain itself to people who don't know the series, and it doesn't need to. Like, this show should exist on its own, but they made the smart choice, I'll say, to attach itself to the canon of the games in a way that makes sense. However, it kind of overly explains and then under explains at times. And similar to how Westworld was structured, that cuts back and forth to flashbacks and in a typical Nolan way. However, it doesn't pay off as much. Um, it likens itself to the plain writing style and the lightweight nature of Fallout 4, which was a kind of more focused story, but had a lot of busy work to it, just visiting settlements and whatnot. And it kind of lacks the um, rule breaking fun or creativity of Fallout 3 in New Vegas. Um, Again, with less narrative urgency, I kind of wanted to drift off and look at my phone, although it being an Amazon show, and them being a tech company, I'm sure they don't mind whether Jonathan Nolan does or not. It goes to, remains to be discovered. Anyways, when the show switches to Maximus, the Brotherhood of Steel character, I was just as bored as I was encountering that faction in Fallout 3, only this time I couldn't, skip through it. I'd be curious actually if Amazon released an abridged version that cut out most of Maximus's storyline. I honestly think the show would flow better. His arc is basically the same as Finn's journey in The Force Awakens, the Star Wars movie, Episode 7. Although it's executed a bit less effectively and without a satisfying resolution. It's almost as if it were developed with the expectation of being cut, although I'm not saying that. It's just that it it doesn't really add a lot to the overall story. Um, Additionally, Maximus's relationship with Lucy feels underdeveloped, failing to explore the potential dynamics between two contrasting characters that share a common goal. He is a surface dweller, naive about the internal human experience, and she is a vault dweller, naive about the external wasteland experience. Not once do they seriously test each other or rely on one another to complete their own goal or seriously come into conflict. Even the reason for them to come into conflict with the ghoul is weak. But then, in the game, you never really needed much reason to conflict with somebody because you could hurt somebody at any time. It just had to be fun. Um, Weirdly, and I thought about this in my review, is that I felt that there was a greater emotional attachment to the central couple in the Twisted Metal TV series, another video game adaptation they did for these two here. Twisted Metal, by the way, is on Paramount Plus, for those of you in Canada, on Peacock in the US. Um, Similarly, Lucy, the protagonist, her lack of heroic qualities results in a less impactful narrative. It's possible the show creators were mindful of players that play with like negative karma and do bad things as a hedge against the game's morality, and didn't really want to make the character more interesting at the cost of alienating the audience. I know it seems like I'm overthinking it here, but looking at how some of the people have tirelessly reacted to this series, calling it woke and this, and going through, it's stupid because, there's an argument for, okay, I'm gonna get into it here, wokeism in video games and movies. And part of me, as a white male, gets what these, frankly, other white males are saying about, like, with Disney stuff, how they basically take a white character and diversify them. But that has no merit here because it's just a TV show about somebody other than a guy. And the reason I want to argue in favor of, I hate this term, but like wokeism, is that anytime you make a series about a guy who's like a white guy, you are competing with the best narratives that are ever told in pop culture memory. Okay, you're competing with Casablanca, Lawrence of Arabia, Lord of the Rings. Okay, like any, even if you don't think so, like you're competing with Moby Dick, you're competing with all matters of media. And the thing is that if you were to do a show, and this is what I think, sensibilities aside, you want to write what you know and you write yourself, you have to write about the human experience. But if you're creating a show now and you just simply make it about something else other than a white man, even if you repeat a lot of the same elements of those white male stories, you are in, even if it's the most shallow way possible, creating something new. Like, what would Fallout be if you were the Vault 101 guy and, you just basically recreated Fallout 3 with fidelity? People would like it, but there'd be people coming up saying, like, oh, it's not as good as Falling Skies, the sci fi TV show, or, The Expanse, or, so it's basically, it doesn't bother me at all. I did think about representation with the Brotherhood of Steel Companion, who I believe is a trans character, and I did think, oh, it'd be interesting to see like what their story was, but like I was always convinced and knew that, like, of course that would be on the periphery, and with making Maximus a black man and stuff like that, understand that this is basically a $153 million show, and they went to Netflix, or sorry, Amazon. Maybe they did go to Netflix, Jonathan Nolan and whatnot, and they sensibly said, "We know our customer base. You can't make this about white men because they're just not the dominant population anymore. This has to appeal to everyone, but it's not the '90s anymore, and there's a more diverse group of people." So, you know, granted, they have to get white men on board. They're like the essential thing. And I don't want to get into this whole audience demographic thing, but basically, it's to cover the bases of like a four quadrant series and justify the price. You have to have it that somebody who does not know Fallout is going to look at this and say, ooh, I might play that. I might watch that. And that's why it is, because us white guys, we're going to show up no matter what, okay? Like, th- they make an Uncharted game. I'm an Uncharted fan. Like, most of the media is made for me. So, I'm gonna show up to good stuff, you know, no matter what. So it's better for them to kind of reach out and try and represent someone else who's not already a sure thing. That's just like the business sense of them talking. But anyways, um, the show's independence in terms of thinking about its characters, them not relying on one another, aligns with the single player nature of the series, minus Fallout 76, which is multiplayer only. But it just, I find the TV series overall falls short of delivering the gripping drama or gut busting quality that lies in its potential. It's not super funny, And I kept thinking, aside from one instance which I shared on TikTok and YouTube, that like it's not as funny as it should be. It's not as funny as the games, and I don't think Jonathan Nolan has like a super strong sense of humor or anything. And granted, it has other writers on it, and he's just the creator, and uh, there's another person running the show. But um, I just thought it could have been a bit funnier. It's engaging, but it's not like funny. And I find a lot of shows like Beef or Succession or The Bear, those are like three shows that basically won all of the awards. And they're all kind of comedies that aren't comedies. And it's kind of a weird thing going on with shows anymore. Personally, I always find it as kind of an extension of the indie movement of the 2010s, these dramedies, comedies that aren't very funny or very dramatic. I find them very easy to do as like an amateur filmmaker. So I find essentially that extension of, what people are making now. It's kind of the laziest thing because it's just matching the sensibility of the world. Like we all see comedy, on scrolling TikTok and it's these microseconds of our day to day, and we're dealing with heavy subjects. And that kind of attitude essentially is the approach to filmmaking that most of the popular media of the last 5 years has done. Comedies that aren't very funny, but kind of should be, and kind of might have a funny aesthetic about them, like a documentary feel or the way it does its colors or appearing in a heightened reality. They're kind of like these surreal comedies or serial dramas. And that's basically where we're at. I find it kind of lazy. I wish that there could have been more humor added to the show. But it is what it is. As I referred to earlier, the flashback structure. There's a subplot involving the ghoul. His name is Cooper Howard. Howard, probably because Todd Howard is kind of the face of the series of the games. Um, and the double last name and whatnot. It sounds sophisticated, but his backstory, which opens the show, kind of promises more depth, but it lacks a significant payoff. I was expecting more than like, oh, he knows so and so, and that's kind of like the revelation. That did little to change the game or narrative of the overall series, so I found the payoff kind of lackluster. So, in conclusion, the series boasts high production values and sets the stage for potentially more compelling seasons ahead. Um, but it ultimately feels like a prelude to a more captivating adaptation, like the most annoying big budget TV shows do nowadays. Like you finish the season of The Bear, and then it finds out that they are naming the restaurant The Bear, and it's like, okay, now the show can begin. With Halo, I've mentioned this several times. You get to the end of season two, and it's like, okay, well, now the show is gonna start, and it's like, if you're going to write a compelling narrative, start with the most interesting time in the character's life. And if it's not the most interesting time in the character's life, then you better have a good reason because the audience isn't going to buy in. I would give this show a 6.9 out of 10. If you like the games, you'll love the show, but you have to carry everything you don't like about it with it. Would I recommend this show, like just to a stranger? No, I wouldn't. It's interesting. It's something to watch, but it feels like super expensive, high done, very good content filler, and that's just how I feel about it. Uh, but moving on to the weekend box office, Civil War came out this past weekend, and I've been looking forward to it because I love movies that kind of tackle how we live now, but like take that as window dressing and then have it kind of be in the background. Enter Civil War, a movie that on its face seems political, but then, like Call of Duty and war conflict and stuff, goes out of its way essentially to address current issues, which for an action movie is fine and for a comedy is fine. I was watching late night last night and it's just I rolled my eyes like, of course, Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel and even Jimmy Fallon to a lesser extent, they all got to take time out and like do 5 minutes of like just straight Trump jokes, and it's just like I don't want to see that. Number one, none of them are particularly funny anymore. But it's just like I just saw this on the news. I don't want to retire the night hearing about Trump. And Trump by himself is like funny. I don't need extra on top of that. So, you would think then it's like, oh, well, don't be political, Civil War, it's going to bomb. That explains why this wasn't done by any of like the major studios, although I would argue that maybe 20th Century Fox could have made a movie like this, or it could be similar to, Red Dawn. They used to make more politically relevant movies way back in the day, before the 21st century. But this is a movie that kind of could only have been made by A24 now, so it's interesting in that regard. I haven't seen it. I was browsing Twitter, and of course, it got spoiled for me. That was pretty much my own fault, to see how it ends. So, I mean, I was on board halfway about seeing this movie in theaters because the premise interests me, but the filmmaker doesn't really. Alex Garland, who wrote it and directed it, you can see in the preview he's the screenwriter of 28 Days Later, Ex Machina, and Annihilation. And those are three movies, including the video game he wrote, Enslaved Odyssey to the West, that basically, I'm sorry to insult anybody's audience here, but feels like a dumb guy's idea of smart. All of his, and I haven't seen Civil War, all of his screenplays, for the most part, less so Annihilation, but 28 Days Later in particular, and Sunshine, another one that he wrote, which was directed by Danny Boyle about space astronauts going to reignite the sun. A premise which, by the way, I had come up with in my head in like grade 5 before he had. Just saying, because if I ever read like something about people reigniting the sun, I didn't take it from Sunshine, I had it before. But every one of this guy's scripts, they have a philosophical element to it, existential questions being asked and answered. And he kind of either sidesteps the answer, and B, essentially, in order to tell the story he wants to tell, has characters make obscenely dumb decisions in order to further the plot. That's the case in 28 Days Later with them letting the zombie go, or changing the tire. You can rewatch that movie. It's a good movie. Not a great one, but I like it. 28 Weeks Later kind of makes the same mistakes which he didn't write, but has some interesting things to it. I like it. Still waiting on 28 Years Later, which now they're gonna like reboot as like a trilogy, even though they didn't finish the original trilogy. It's very tiring, but I look forward to it, because I like zombie movies. But anyways, this guy, all of the endings to his movies are unsatisfactory, and in every single one, he has a character who makes a dumb decision, and I've heard that about character played by Kaylee Spenny in this movie. And that's kind of what's preventing me from it. As well, it's like he holds back. He basically has action movie premises that don't often deliver on the action. Usually there's one or two scenes, but it's like people philosophizing and being dramatic where the action should be. So I was unclear watching it. Are the action scenes gonna be just, one or two pieces and that's what they're floating to us? Or is it like an action packed movie? And I didn't know that, so I didn't want to go see. And I also didn't want to have like a diatribe or be politicized where, it's like, journalism's important, you guys, and it becomes like a message movie, because I feel on his worst instincts, Alex Garland has that, where it's like the movie stops in its tracks for whatever it's doing and delivers a message. Um, as for Annihilation, that's an okay movie, but it tries to be a bit cerebral, and I don't find that it has like as many interesting ideas as I think it does. And then Ex Machina is the king of like a character makes a blindingly obvious stupid decision, and sort of shocker, it comes back on them poorly. And I just kind of didn't want to pay or endorse that. And I've become, as the time goes on, less and less a fan of writers who also direct, because I find it's not in the spirit of filmmaking collaboration. Back in the early part of the 21st century, a lot more directors would direct scripts from someone else, and it was like a team sport. But now, if you look at the last almost 10 people who have won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, they have all essentially directed their own scripts, which I find very annoying, and I will not stand for. So that's why I didn't see Civil War. But I'm happy for its success because no other studio would have made the movie. And I flip flop on it because there's this weird group on the Reddit subreddit of box office who like want this movie to bomb. And it's just there are a lot of these bad actors, and I mentioned it a bit with Fallout. Many of whom probably didn't even play the game, and this kind of plays into the dead internet theory, where it's like these people are either bots or they don't consume the culture that they complain about. Like, these people want Civil War to bomb. Why? Like, I love it because, like, I mentioned I don't like Alex Garland's last few movies. This looks like a movie that I would watch. I'd love for that to be great, you know? But there are people who are like, oh, I hope this movie bombs because X, Y, and Z. It's like, you can hope that, like, the latest Disney garbage of, like, Mufasa, The Lion King 2 bombs so that Moonlight director Barry Jenkins goes back to making actual movies and not commercials. Um, like, you can hope for the Disney direct to bomb, and it has been, because the only ideas that they have in their movies are essentially like, what if this but diversity? And their diversity includes weirdly taking redheaded characters and making them black, which is a thing. You can look at it. I mean, The Little Mermaid is the culprit, but they've done that with a lot of things where it's like, oh, well, these white characters are too white for people to notice, but the redhead can be, exchanged. It's kind of weird. But nonetheless, it was the number one movie, A24's first number one movie that they have ever done. And good for them. Although I kind of think with like a studio like that of like, okay, you've been around for 10 years and you've never had a number one movie. And this is, where I get, if you want to send a message, use Western Union kind of thing. I find the majority of their movies are at least like 50% messaging. Like the director, who's most of the time also a writer, is doing like an exercise and doesn't want to entertain people or engage with them. They want to kind of get across their own messaging. And that's the pitfall of most independent cinema for me. So without further delay, I'll go down my top 49 films from A24 that I have seen of theirs. These are movies that they distributed, which they did for the most part of their uh, establishment, and then a few of them they've produced as well. Um, it's kind of funny that my brother pointed out to me of like, oh, people like an A24 film, whoa, like, they're just a distributor, okay? Like, for most of these films, they had nothing to do with the making of the movie. They didn't really make their own movies until Moonlight, which is about, 3 or 4 years in, and again, they've only made like a few of their own films. I know that Civil War, they both made and distributed it, but for the most part, when people like attach their cultural online internet identity to being like an A24 film fan, it's like what happened was a movie was made, completed, shown at a festival, and then a guy in a suit walked in and offered them money to put it in theaters after it was done. And Netflix is the same for the most part. The studio is a bit less than major studios. But yeah, without it coming down, here are my top films from A24 that I've seen. And I've seen a lot of them, hence the 49 list. But I started watching them when I saw Spring Breakers in theaters when I was in university, completing my first year. Okay, here we go. Number 49 is The Green Knight. Visually fantastic movie. With a decent trailer, it stars Dev Patel about a Green Knight who basically goes on a quest and finds that it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It's a medieval fantasy movie And the reason I don't like it is because it's a very simple plot, and it's, I guess, about themes and ideas, and I hate that kind of stuff. There's not a whole lot of action. There's a lot of positing and thinking. David Lowery, who directed it, he also did the Disney remake of Pete's Dragon, which is probably the most enjoyable film of his that he's done that I've liked. And then he also did The Old Man and the Gun with Robert Redford as his last performance. And he also did A Ghost Story. Of the movies I've seen, and I haven't seen his debut, Ain't Them Bodies Saints. Before that, he was an editor on the film Upstream Color. Um, but what frustrates me so much is that The Green Knight was one of those COVID delayed movies early on. And there was a more commercial version of this movie that was a lot shorter. Um, and I wanted to see that movie. This movie's 2 hours and 10 minutes, and it is a slog, um, just an absolute slog, um, and I didn't like it at all. So moving on, number 48 is Come On, Come On. This movie is kind of in black and white for no reason. Mike Mills, who directed it, is another boring director in my book, and it was good for one TikTok I had. So that was nice. It was just Joaquin Phoenix walking at a beach. But yeah, it was a boring movie, and what I disliked most about it was that the kid in it, played by actor Woody Norman, who I'm sure he was directed this way, but his character was so annoying. He was the most annoying child I've seen. And most people who say, "Oh, that's just a regular kid," and it's like, no, it's not. You don't have kids. They're not this annoying. And when you can choose to cut up a movie, and you choose the cut where the kid is most annoying, I'm sorry, but your movie deserves to lose money. Moving on. The Witch, New England folktale. This is one of those like painstakingly realistic movies. Even though it has like a medieval premise, a medieval horror premise. This was for many people the first movie they saw um, Anya Taylor-Joy in. It's directed by Robert Eggers. In his debut, he also did The Lighthouse and The Northman. Both movies I do not like, and it's just uh, light on story, heavy on theme. I don't need to beat a dead horse. Number 46 is Talk to Me. This was a big hit last summer, horror movie. Reason I don't like it. I find the main character unlikable and weird. And I can't really relate to that character. It's not really an entrance into that story. Happy for its success. It's getting a sequel called Talk to Me. But it was one of those that's heavy on hype, low on interest, and it felt similar to the horror movie Smile, a redo of The Ring, except it was all underexplored. Number 45 is White Noise. This is by Noah Baumbach. This is $100 million movie that's very long. It stars Adam Driver, Greta Gerwig, and it kind of fascinatingly mirrors real life events that happened during the movie's release about a chemical spill from a train that happens in like Ohio, which happened in real life several months around the time the film came out. The movie is super long. There are a lot of digressions to it, and I'm just like completely out on the story. It's adapted from a book. It's a very nonlinear story. There were some interesting elements of it. Noah Baumbach, who directed it, it wasn't super well received when it came out. Still isn't. Although I like the LCD Sound System song "New Body Workout," and it fascinatingly has a good trailer that's a teaser, and then a great trailer, which I recommend watching. The theatrical trailer for White Noise, the second trailer, is quite good. But the movie is just full of digressions of like this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and it's again more about like theme, less on plot. I'm a big plot guy. What can I say? Which is why I don't like number 44, Uncut Gems. I don't like this movie. I find it very annoying. I find its directors, Josh and Benny Safdie, annoying. People talking over each other. That's like a thing that people, I guess, attribute to Robert Altman, considered a legendary director from the 70s and 80s and 90s. Um, this kind of overlapping dialogue is super annoying. This movie, Uncut Gems, has like the coolest trailer that A24 has done, and I like to see Adam Sandler acting, but it's just like that does the same cheap trick that the show The Bear does, where it's rapid fire, super zoom close up camera, people talking over each other, people not being able to get along when like the conflict can be resolved very easily. I thought that if this were a straightforward thriller, kind of like a 90s 2000s thriller, um, it like I don't think a lot would be lost in translation to like sanding down the edges of this movie. But they don't need to know that from me. The movie was a hit, and it was, I believe, A24 at the time's most successful film. Until number 43, Everything Everywhere All at Once came out. This movie won Best Picture. It won 7 Oscars. The only one I think that it deserved was Best Supporting Actor by Ke Huy Quan, in a role that was originally given to Jackie Chan. He turned it down. Michelle Yeoh accepted, and they worked the movie around her. This is also a good example of like diversity in storytelling, where it's like originally it was going to be a guy, and then fortunately Jackie Chan turned it down, and it's ends up being about a woman and her daughter. And what do you know? It's a giant hit. Why? Because people kind of hadn't seen this kind of thing before. Personally, for me, the reason I don't like it is because it's kind of like too much of a music video aesthetic. It's good for about 3 minutes, and then I just find it very juddery. It doesn't flow very well, although many of the editing transitions are brilliant and nice. It just feels like a tech demo to me. I don't like the main character Michelle Yeoh plays. I don't like how it's kind of waved away, how she's like homophobic, and that's just taken as like an acceptable cultural norm. I understand that it's like that might be a thing in China, but it's just kind of by some of these white guys who adapt these stories. I'm Daniel Scheinert was like a co-director. It's just kind of like somebody bringing themselves into a culture they don't fully understand, and then going, well, I can't understand this completely, so this is how it is. Other people might not see it that way. They might look at it as like, oh, frankness, I was able to connect with my daughter or mother after seeing this movie and stuff. But it's just kind of like it treats homophobia in a way where it feels like, oh, it's tolerable because it comes from like a different culture or something. And I just, I know that's a weird thing to get hung up on. But yeah, I didn't like it. It frustrates me that, Hollywood just like awarded it piles and piles. Again, I'm happy for its success, as I am for most movies, but like it winning best editing when it's just a bunch of fancy transitions and then the guy gets up on stage. If you watch his Oscar win for editing, he's like, wow, this is crazy. This is my first film. And it's like, can you imagine being Eddie Hamilton, who's worked for 30 years? He makes Top Gun Maverick. He's nominated for best editing. Hollywood doesn't award those movies that often. The money is enough. And Top Gun Maverick is just a perfectly edited movie, trims out all the fat. It is perfectly well done. And they give it to a movie like this, which I had a hard time sitting through. I get 20 minutes into Everything Everywhere All at Once, and then I just get bored. It's like too much. It's sensory overload, and I find the story just super thin. But they give it Best Picture and Best Director over Steven Spielberg for The Fabelmans, which bothers me because it's more masterfully directed than this movie is. And they give it screenplay as well, and Best Actress Michelle Yeoh I was cool with. That's a good win. I actually thought that it was the best performance of the year because no one else could have done what Michelle Yeoh did, and Ke Huy Quan was like the supporting actor of the year. I agree with those two, and I understand Jamie Lee Curtis winning in a way because they want to support Jamie Lee Curtis, and the best supporting actress of that year was Dolly DeLeon in that Ruben Ostlund film, Triangle of Sadness. That didn't get nominated, so I was like, okay, who cares who wins supporting actress? I didn't think Stephanie Hsu in it was honestly as good as everybody said she was. So I was kind of like, okay, Jamie Lee Curtis wins. She was a champion. If you look at the press circuits of this movie, she was like the champion of this movie. She was like the industry connected person who was like the lifeline to Hollywood. She's part of the reason the movie is successful. Not in the film, but outside of it. And I'm not cool with movies being awarded that way, but I understand it. And there wasn't anyone. Again, they didn't nominate Dolly DeLeon, which, again, if you watch Triangle of Sadness, you're like, that is one of the best performances of the year. She plays a maid who essentially, when class structure gets flipped on its head, benefits immensely from it. And it's just a very good performance, which for the most part, is one of the best performances of the year. So that's enough about that. Moving on to Good Time by the Safdies. I don't like this film a whole lot, but it is the best Robert Pattinson performance. It's pretty much the same plot as Uncut Gems, maybe on a smaller level. It has less of the annoying overlapping dialogue. The settings I find more interesting, although I love in Uncut Gems that Adam Sandler's character's shop. Um, this movie is very much the same, very throwback 70s New York kind of film with the neon drenched soak look that a lot of movies from the recent digital era are like. So I found the plot to that more compelling. It's again very much the same movie but purer. So that's why I like Good Time better than Uncut Gems. Number 41, Under the Silver Lake. This is a movie where again you have a director, in this case David Robert Mitchell, who made It Follows, and you have a character where uh, played by Andrew Garfield, um, emulated by the director. David Robert Mitchell had like this was his passion project after It Follows was a huge success. And basically, what he did was he spent like years and then months writing and everything on like the placement of a cereal box in this movie. This is like his almost tribute to Kubrick. And it's just basically about a guy played by Andrew Garfield who's pretty unlikable, meets a girl played by Riley Keough who looks like an old fashioned movie star. And then he kind of seeks out to find her and stumbles onto this big, hilarious conspiracy. And it's funny in that sense, like in thought, but it's just super long. And it's a case of The Green Knight where there was a much more audience friendly version of this movie, which would have made money, and the messages of the film would have been maintained in its progress, but the director just did not want to play ball. So that's basically what happened there. Um, it's funny. I was thinking like, okay, why did It Follows? Because you think of that as an A24 film, right? It's not. It's like the Weinstein Company actually. Because I was just browsing this, I'm like, why isn't It Follows? That seems like an A24 movie, right? But again, A24 is a brand and like nothing else. It's just a distributor. So like any movie can conceivably become an A24 movie. And you'll see when I get to the top that like many of these are more conventional movies. But you'll see as I get there. Number 40 is After Sun. Again, this is in the group of like movies that I don't like, and I'll let you know when I cross the threshold. But After Sun is basically a movie for kids born of like from 1985 to 1990. And well, sorry, one of my users just messaged me asking if the Lion King is an allegory for Macbeth. The answer is no. It's an allegory for Hamlet, but it is not my favorite version of Hamlet. My favorite version of Hamlet is Tommy Boy, which you can look up on YouTube as like the exact same plot of like father dies, son has a chance to replace him, but the uncle steps in, and that uncle is played by Rob Lowe, and he has a weird incestuous relationship with the mother, and whatnot, and that's played by Bo Derek, who's actually in the movie the stepmom and whatnot. But nonetheless, Tommy Boy, there's a reason it is the best-selling DVD in Paramount Pictures library. It's a good, funny, heartfelt film, and that transition, by the way, at from him falling down to the funeral, which you'll see in the movie, is one of my favorite transitions in film. But nonetheless, After Sun is quite good aesthetically. There's a lot of great images in the movie, but like I find that like these movies that are essentially all about cinematography and themes seem to get all these great reviews. And then afterwards, like, what's the lasting footprint they have? It's like, oh, they make you feel really sad. That's great. But are they entertaining films? No. But they show up, they do an awards run, they have beautiful cinematography, which looks good to promote, and it's like trauma tourism. It's like, oh, these movies that tell millennials how sad they are. It's like, grow up. I'm just never a fan. Although, I did get a tweet out about it that it would be a good Annapurna interactive game that could be either like a point and click adventure style or like a walking simulator. If the Chinese Room or one of those developers made After Sun, it would make a better immersive simulator game, which is, games where you essentially walk around, pick up things, like Gone Home, if you've ever played it, listen to audio tapes and stuff like that. That is the version of the story that would work best as an interactive drama, After Sun. So, Charlotte Wells, writer and director, if you're listening to this, contact the Chinese Room or Annapurna Interactive, because she also made movies. Megan Ellison, who ran it, by the way, made movies that are similar to yours, getting them produced and whatnot. And if you had her translate that or help you translate that into a game, I'm telling you, it would do very well. The Life is Strange people, Don't Nod would also do a good job. Same with Campo Santo. These people need work, and I like good stories in games, which is somewhat antithetical because like gameplay is like the best thing about video games, but I'm also a story guy because I like movies so much. Hello, FilmGamer. But like really, story is secondary to video games. This is one that would benefit from being a video game. Number 39, The Disaster Artist. I like Scott Neustadter and Michael H. Weber, who wrote this. And it's an interesting premise, but the making of the worst movie ever made. It just kind of isn't as funny or as dramatic as I want it to be. It will be the best and most notable movie James Franco will ever make, and he's good in it. And again, happy that it got a screenplay nod and whatnot. But it's one of those where it's stronger in concept than it is in execution, and it's admirable that it was made. But again, not the biggest fan of it. Okay, number 38, End of the Tour. This movie I saw recently, and it's one of those where it was like highly lauded but didn't make much of a splash. The answer to that is why it wasn't more successful is that the critics were wrong. This is a movie about David Foster Wallace, who made Infinite Jest, played by Jason Segel in his best performance, and Gene Lipnicki. Now I have to look it up. I'm bothered here. Let me just da 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 da. Anyways, the end of the tour. David Foster Wallace goes on like a book tour, and this is the guy who interviews him. And David Lipsky, sorry. And it's just basically the bond of these two men. And the problem I have with the movie is that the director, James Ponsoldt, who ranks higher on this list actually, he does not visually tell a story. He recounts a story. basically on audio tape. This would have made maybe a better podcast than it is a movie, which is funny because um, Straw Hat Goofy, a popular guy on film TikTok, who frankly annoys me with like all of his takes. Um, People who have like fiercely dumb takes on movies like offend me in a hilarious way that like not many people do. And there's an element of jealousy to it, like when somebody has like a quote unquote wrong opinion about movies or expresses like some sort of ignorance about some tiny thing that only I know. Drives me up a wall because I think like, oh, they don't know as much as me. Why aren't I famous? And the answer is they work really hard, and I need to work harder. But the end of the tour, it, it's like the documentary of the making of behind that, which is a short documentary, feels like it's put together with, more visual interest than James Ponsoldt puts into this. This is essentially like a story in search of a movie. You have two, good performances and an interesting story. It's not enough. You have to visually tell the story that people are watching. I watched this with the twofer, with Jason Reitman's Labor Day, which I was shocked at. Jason Reitman has never struck me as a visual storyteller. He's had great success working with Diablo Cody, the writer. And that movie, Labor Day, which I believe was shot with Sony Venice cameras, because most movies get shot with either the RE Alexa branded cameras, or they get shot with the Red Epic Dragon cameras. And there's the Sony Alta Venice is kind of in the intermediary. But this movie uses, I believe, the Sony Venice cameras, or it could just be our. Now I got to look that up too. But anyways, I digress. Labor Day is visually beautiful, and to go from that and then see the end of the tour, you're kind of like, okay, like this looks way worse. Like, it's always funny when you pair certain movies together. Like people talk about marathons and like, oh, what's the best trilogy to watch? You know what the best experience is when you watch two completely different movies back to back. That's what's exciting because I watched Labor Day and the end of the tour, two movies that have like no business being with each other, and the strengths of one movie with the weaknesses of another. Like Labor Day isn't a well-regarded film critically. It's critically mixed. About like sub 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't think it's like super low, but my brother saw it at TIFF, was a big fan of it, and got it. And what's funny to me is that movie, like, it's well acted and stuff, and like just visually beautiful. And it's about essentially a thief, robber, escaped convict who stays at a house. And yet it's visually enticing. It's some of Jason Reitman's best direction, and if it were distributed properly, it probably would have done better. I know it came out at TIFF around Labor Day, but like instead of coming out, they released it in January. Why is it that Hollywood cannot release movies like on the day they're supposed to come out? The November Man, you know when that movie came out? August. Okay? Labor Day, when did that come out? January. Leap Day, when did that come out? Like January or something. It wasn't a leap day. I'll tell you that. And people are like, "Oh, it's so crowded." There's only so many things. Let me tell you this: Mickey 17, from the director of Parasite, which won Best Picture, starring Robert Pattinson, made by Warner Brothers on like hundreds of $1 million of budget. More than he said that movie has been done since November, and it is sitting on the shelf, waiting to come out. Okay, finished movies, especially by distributors that like collect them and they collect scripts, sometimes sit on the shelf for years. I saw a copy of Taken. Okay, uh, it was pirated. It was a heavily pirated movie. It came out. I liked it. I forget who got the copy of it, but I like watched it with my siblings, and I'm like, oh, that was fun. It doesn't come out for like 6 months, maybe a year after that, and then when they release it, Super Bowl weekend, which nothing else is playing. The movie's a huge hit, changes Liam Neeson's career. Why? Because it was just came out at the right time, and that's what these movies need to do. But had Jason Reitman like been successful in that movie, he would have progressed in a better way as a director rather than taking on his dad's legacy as the Ghostbusters guy. And James Ponsoldt, similarly, after this movie, I haven't. He did The Circle with Tom Hanks and Emma Watson, and it adapts a novel by Dave Eggers in a very straightforward way. But his lack of insight into the story, like he's kind of like a hired hand that just films the script. He doesn't add much to the story. So, that's my issue with the end of the tour is that you have to, as a director, make it cohesive, bring things together, bring up the themes and stuff. And I know I've criticized the rest of these movies on this list for not having better themes or being too much about theme and telling that story and making the subtext text. I hate that. I like my movies, with their themes being subtle and then entertaining on the surface. And I just don't find a lot of these movies entertaining. And a lot of people I know will be really annoyed at this list because I am like a Spielberg when it comes to my movie taste. I like popular movies done well, and I'm less Scorsese, although Scorsese you could argue now is like more of a popular director. But nonetheless, Midsommar is number 37 on this list. This is a movie, at least it has its own vibe. And, some movies follow you in life. I went to see this movie and I actually like remember it. It was August 9th, 2019. And I remember it because I went to go see this movie and it was like a thunderstorm had happened or was about to happen. I could feel the thunder and it had like cinematic sinister vibes. This is a movie I went to see by myself for I think to review it, and then maybe I didn't even end up reviewing it, which is funny. And I had to stop on the way in the middle of the highway, because it was on Bath Road, which is technically a highway and stuff, but there was nobody else around, and like a coyote. It was like a scene out of Collateral. A coyote wandered across the a roadway, and I paused it, and then I paused the car. Geez, wow, we're a short future away from Ready Player One. Now that I'm like referring to video games in real life, and I hear people when I walk down the street talk like internet talk in real life, it's sinister the way our life is going. But anyways, I stopped the car, and the coyote wolf whatever passes, um and there's like a thunderstorm, but it's like sundown, and I'm like, ooh, a bad omen. August 9th, 2019 is the 50th anniversary of the Manson murders. And I know that because I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood a week earlier. And so I go and I sit down at the screening room, the Independent Theater in Kingston, and I watch it. And let me tell you, the boys in this screening that I'm sitting a few rows away from annoy me the entire time. Now, granted, I'm very sensitive. When somebody annoys you in the movie theater, you become hyper fixated on it, and that's what it was with this guy. And I wasn't even enjoying the movie strongly, so I was like super conflicted about it. Midsummer has a fantastic opening. And again, with Ari Aster, it's like, this is a good 100-minute movie that gets stretched out to 2.5 hours because, dare I say, a lot of the filmmakers from the millennials, at least, there are a lot of them, and I don't know much about Ari Aster, but I would assume he is rich because the movies that he makes, and Robert Eggers as well, and there's a few others on this list, it's like they make movies as a hobby and they don't care if they're culturally accepted beyond a certain niche. Like, I know Midsummer did well for them commercially. A24, it's one of their better distribution jobs, came out July 4th weekend, and was positioned very well as a horror, very distinctly. But, like, I did not enjoy the movie, and I thought it was very thin, and there was little reason with better editing. And it had a good editor, Jennifer Lame, who ended up working with Chris Nolan. Um, it could have been a tighter edit, although I'm sure Ari Aster just wanted that. But nonetheless, my brother, who's a fan of the movie, got the Criterion edition, which includes an essay by Martin Scorsese, who, if you read the Criterion essay, is basically like, wow, what a filmmaker. By the way, this, and he speaks very little about Midsummer. It's Martin Scorsese talking about how he liked Hereditary and how filmmaking is important and blah, blah, blah. Marty phoned it in on that one, let's just say. Um, but there's like a 3 hour director's cut, which I have yet to see. But I did not enjoy the experience of it, but it's such a distinct experience that you kind of, it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. But Midsummer or Midsummer, either way is appropriate. Well distributed, major cultural footprint, good follow up to Hereditary, which places higher on this list. But I just it's one of those where okay, the people should be cluing in this horror movie faster than they're cluing in. There's a lot of scenes that drag on that don't matter, and it's just the director indulging in themselves. And I don't find that there's enough discipline to the movie to enjoy. And then weirdly, one of the few dates that I've been on in the last few years, I went on a date with a girl where I decided not to be myself. So I was going to try and not talk about movies, which I kind of failed at. And the it was the one thing weirdly that I was able to engage with her on. And when I asked her what her favorite movie was, she gave sort of two answers. One was Francis Ha, which was a movie that I honestly turned off 20 minutes because it was so boring. And then the other one was this Midsummer. And the funny thing is, I'm not sure if it's on A24's page or what clip. It was like an official clip posted of the scene in Midsummer where Will Poulter and them do drugs for the first time. And they find out that it's like 9 p.m., but super bright out. He's like, oh, I don't need new people right now. And I posted, it's like, yeah, I dated a girl, and this is her favorite movie. And like the top response was like, run and whatnot. So I was trying to think of like a clever response to it because the date didn't like work out. I can posit about it, but it was like, she was suspicious of me because it's like to brag for a second, know movies so well that even when I act like I like don't know them and try and be open minded and curious, people get suspicious because it's like the uber confidence that I have. It's like, you're hiding something. Like, I remember I went to a party once. This one guy was bullshitting about the Hobbit movies, and I had a literal moment of like, I can I can ruin this whole man's career. I can end this whole man's career. And he was BSing, and he just caught my eye, and I just kind of smirked at him. And he was just like, okay, don't give me up, dude, or whatever. And then I'm kind of like, who benefits from this? Is it just me who benefits from this? Because, if the people joke about on the internet, oh, you must be really fun at parties. That was me avoiding being that guy. And I'm like, okay, state of grace. I'll let this guy say his piece and just kind of nod. And like, but it was weird because I didn't say anything to him. It was just like an eye contact thing. And it was just something about the human experience, I guess, where he kind of knew and he like settled down, I guess. And then I'm like, well, good for me that I didn't, trash this guy or whatever. And then I find out like 6 months later, hey, what happened to so and so when I meet up with the group again? And they're like, oh, he was an asshole. He lied all the time. And I'm like, darn it, I should have torn him apart. Yeah. Anyways, that's my whole take is that I should be more genuine with myself and with others. And this movie is sort of about people who lie to each other for a long time. And then it builds up within them so much emotionally that, there's a catharsis. And I just think it could have been more efficient and arrived at that point sooner. But I do intend to watch the director's cut someday. I'll have another follow up to this movie because it's like, there's the beginning of seeing it in theaters and having an awful experience of like these bros that like don't settle down and annoy you. and then it kind of follows you again when you, I guess, go on a date with somebody who, and it shouldn't be the most part that I fixate on about the date, but it nonetheless, it's like a connection to that movie. I'm sure Ari Aster is secretly thrilled. Maybe after this, I'll watch Beau is Afraid, which is another movie by A24 that I need to watch. I only have a few days left of Paramount Plus, so yeah. Um, I'm sure Ari Aster is thrilled. It'll come up again. I'll do maybe a TikTok or something on it. Why? Because there's parts to like about the movie. It's visually well done. The performances are good. It's just, it feels like Ari Aster is rubbing it in our faces of like, I get to make this movie, and this is my mind, and you should know how it works and whatnot. So, yeah. Anyways, moving on to Sharper, which is came out last year, an Apple distributed movie, but A24 made it, and it's just a very simple, straightforward con man movie, but told out of order with different characters. And for 2/3 of it, it's pretty good, and then the final third, it's just like the story gets away from them. It stars Justice Smith, who I honestly do not like as an actor. I don't find he adds much. I find his voice also annoying, but he's successful, so good for him. He's kind of benefited from I'm sorry to say this, but like wokeness of it, because the thing that people have done, and it's used in Sharper as well, where he is John Lithgow's son, or he might be the stepson. But like, why is it? Because it's like, oh, it's believable, because Justice Smith is light skinned, that he would have like biracial parents. And so like he's benefiting that way. But I'm sure he hustles. He shows up on time, remembers his lines, because he gets good work. But he does feel like one of those actors that Hollywood tries to make happen. I don't really like seeing him in anything at all. I don't find him very funny. I don't find him very funny, effective dramatically. Um, yeah, sorry, Justice Smith, but no justice for you. Moving on. Enemy. Denis Villeneuve film. I find it a miss, and it's a good example of the limits of Jake Gyllenhaal's strengths as an actor, because playing two characters, you need to basically have more distinction. And you could fault essentially this movie on its weak script. It's a Canadian movie about a professor who discovers that he has a doppelganger who's kind of like a low level movie star, and basically blackmails the guy into switching bodies with him. And the movie has a lot to say. Some people think it kind of ruminates on themes that Denis Villeneuve is too comfortable with and doesn't explore very many new spaces. I'm sure that's valid. It's a great YouTube movie that is like, it's a great movie to see some film bro, go on about like the themes and meanings of it, or you see it all the time on Studio Binder's channel, because Denis Villeneuve is a very film bro friendly director. But I find that it misses. I don't think that Jake Gyllenhaal is very interesting in the movie. He doesn't give you two characters who are that interesting, and I find it the fault of him as an actor. Like, he's a pretty good actor. He's probably a better movie star, which is to say that when you see Jake Gyllenhaal in a movie, you kind of want to hang with him. You don't want to see him play somebody different. You want to be informed by the characters that he's playing. And that's why, like, his best performances, in my opinion, are Day After Tomorrow, where he's just playing a guy his age, like a everyman, and then where he's just kind of crazy in Ambulance. Um, those roles are better. The one time he did successfully play another person was Lou Bloom in Nightcrawler, which I like, but think is a tad overrated. Um, but yeah, Jake Gyllenhaal, pretty good, but like, I think a better, stronger actor could have pulled that off. But the other thing too is that actors grow as they get older, and Jake Gyllenhaal probably has gotten better as he's gotten older, for sure. So, number 34, The Tragedy of Macbeth. Macbeth is my favorite play. I do not like the way Joel Coen did this. This was his first movie without his brother Ethan. And Shakespeare is his collaborator, basically, and Frances McDormand and Denzel Washington. This is a very well cast movie. You even have people like Corey Hawkins in it, who I don't usually like, but he's good here. And what you can tell about a good director is that when they don't have, like, they hire an actor who's not very good, but they happen to get a good performance out of him. That's the sign of a good actor. And my problem with um, Denzel's Macbeth movie is that Denzel is good in it, but I don't like Shakespeare adapted as is. This movie does an interesting thing where it's very minimalist, black and white, 4:3, and all that. And I get what they're doing there. It's stripping it all out and making it as dramatic as possible. But I guess what bothers me most is that when you're a director as talented as Joel Cohen is, I want him to introduce to the masses something cool. I want sort of like a modern day Macbeth. I want Shakespeare where they speak like regular people, like sadly I want Tommy Boy. Um I want The Lion King, even though those are like Hamlet adaptations. But like I want I want Anyone But You, except please make it better than Anyone But You, another Shakespeare adaptation. Um, I want those. I want the filmmakers who know the language, who know the grammar of filmmaking, to go and make a popular piece of entertainment, give it some edge that makes people go, oh, this is interesting. I haven't seen this before. And then they follow to the fringes, what we see in deeper filmmaking. And with the tragedy of Macbeth, I got what they were doing. Catherine Hunter in it, again, is very, very good. As she is in Poor Things, as she is in basically everything that she's in, which she's kind of only on the periphery of. But I got what they were doing, but I don't like seeing Shakespeare adapted word for word. It's very annoying to me. I saw this funny thing on TikTok where somebody was like, "Why does Shakespeare sound better in a Southern American accent?" And the answer is people speak in a way where they know how to emphasize something so you can follow it better. But it's just we're so far removed from that version of modern English of Shakespeare's time that I just find it impossible to follow. And the only parts are the parts that basically people have quoted often, which in Macbeth helps because there's a lot of popular stuff there. But nonetheless, I do not like this version as skillful as it is. Number 33, Moonlight. Beautiful movie, beautiful cinematography by James Laxton. Um, and it's visually beautiful, super slow movie where next to nothing happens. I don't like those movies. I don't like movies that are about one simple thing unless they're like an action movie. Um, Under the Skin, which is number 32, is very similar where it's a visually beautiful movie. This movie is done by Jonathan Glazer about Scarlett Johansson, who's an alien who lands in Scotland and basically tries to figure out how humans live. And it's a bit of a species joint where she has to kind of consume humans a bit, but it's kind of a fascinating observation on the human condition. But it's a brutally slow movie. And one of Jonathan Glazer's other movies appears on this list because I think he's improved his craft from there and it goes higher. Barry Jenkins is similar, where I actually like If Beale Street Could Talk as follow up to Moonlight a bit better because it has a bit more going on. But it's these filmmakers, it's like their better stories are probably still ahead of them. Um, uh, but like I want them to play ball a bit and like do a one for us rather than a one for them. Number 31 is The Farewell. This is starring Aquafina about a girl who basically the conceit of it is that it switches between English and Chinese, and this girl who has mostly grown up English most of her life, her family is Chinese, her grandmother is going to die of cancer, and basically in China, I guess, They don't tell the person they're dying of cancer, they tell the family, and the family has to figure out how to tell them. And that's just kind of the dramatic pull of this movie of like, you have a girl who is Chinese, grown up most of her life American, doesn't have much in common with the culture of which she was born into. So it's kind of like a serious Crazy Rich Asians without them being, if they were middle class and it wasn't a comedy, there wasn't much romance. It's like that. Wang directed it. She seems to know what she's doing. She was smart enough to turn down a Marvel project. She was probably offered the Eternals. It was funny. She's great at a round table, which I rewatched part of today with Martin Scorsese, where Martin is kind of surprised that, she was offered a Marvel movie and he wasn't, or at least that's the thing. Not that he should be surprised because he wouldn't be offered that. He's too powerful. He's too smart of a director that he'd get too much pull and wouldn't be able to play ball. Which, hey, to his credit, is do what you want. But Lulu Wang followed that up with television drama Expats with Nicole Kidman, which was okay reviewed. I don't really want to see it. Funny thing is, Lulu Wang and Barry Jenkins are boyfriend girlfriend, and most filmmakers kind of get together and live together and such. I mean, it's kind of an era that we're living in of boyfriend girlfriend, husband and wife with Christopher Nolan and Emma Thomas, and then you have husband and wife Margot Robbie and Tom Ackerman, I believe, and another one is David F. Sandberg and his wife, who produced Annabelle Creation and Shazam 1 and 2, and Lights Out. Uh, if you're a guy and you're directing, and you want a job for your wife that doesn't like break up your family, basically have them work in the same business you do so you can see each other often. And yeah, that's what most successful marriages do nowadays, I guess. So yeah, does that say much about The Farewell? No. I just wanted to say that interesting premise, kind of a boring movie. It has a good performance in it by Z Ma, who always like I know him from Arrival as like essentially the prime minister or the president Xi Jinping, and he kind of always he's played that guy a lot, but he's a good, well liked actor. Aquafina is fine in it, but Xi Ma or Z Ma, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. He's always good to see. It's that Hollywood thing though, where it's like Hiroyuki Sanada, who's on Shogun. He always plays a samurai. This guy always plays like the president of China. But they're both good and they're both likable. So who loses? Nobody. People like The Farewell. It was a success. Moving on. Number 30 is Low Tide. This is a super under the radar movie. Basically, the lowest form of a buried treasure movie that there is. It's done by this guy named Kevin McMullen. I'm not sure what really he has done since. I don't think he's done anything since. It says on his thing first prize, but it's decently cast. It stars Shea Wiggum, and it's about these kids who kind of find this treasure, and they're all of varying. There's the a-hole kid, there's the main kid, and then there's kind of the kid who's like not that important to the group. And it's just basically they have shifting alliances with this cop played by Shea Wiggum on where this buried treasure is found and stored. And it's like an okay watch. I like the premise, and I like how it's executed. You kind of drift in and out, and low tide. Hey, there you go. So the slackened pace could be tightened, even though I don't. It's not a long movie. It's 86 minutes. It's kind of like a short film premise. But I thought it was fine, and I like the plot. That's all it's needed. Another movie, number 29, that I saw at Christmas, The Iron Claw, featuring Zac Efron's best performance. although not the best performance in the movie. The best performance in the movie actually goes towards this guy the one character who I hadn't heard of before, Stanley Simons in it. Like Holt McCallany is wonderful in the movie. Everybody is wonderful in the movie, but Stanley Simons as Mike Von Erich is the best in this movie. He gave the best performance, but it's not a flashy name, so he didn't get nominated. And A24 had a lot on its plate that year with The Zone of Interest and Past Lives, and both of those ended up getting nominated for Best Picture. So The Iron Claw, which didn't end up doing much of a festival run and came out at Christmas, didn't get nominated. So it's kind of stupid that, the eligibility window for the Oscars is December 31st. So it's stupid that a well-liked, well-reviewed movie. I love the visual style of this movie. The coloring is fantastic. The performances are good. The story is worthy. It's a bit slow at times, but it's suitably dramatic. Where after you finish, you're like, okay, I didn't waste my time. This was a decent story worth telling by Sean Durkin, who had made Martha Marcy May Marlene before. That's another intriguing movie that drifts between beguiling and boring. So if he just directs a short movie, he should be good. His second movie, The Nest, is a Canadian movie, well reviewed, that I didn't see. But moving on to number 28, Ex Machina, which I've already mentioned. This movie, which by the way I successfully predicted would win special effects at the Oscars in one of my legendary Oscar pools. I got like 13 or 16 categories right that year. Just smoked everybody in the Fulcrum Publishing pool, and to the point where they're like, okay, you're winning too much. This isn't funny anymore. But nonetheless, I like the movie. I like the premise. It's pretty good. But it stars Domhnall Gleeson, who I don't like. I never find him likable. He's very irritating. I do not find him representative of the characters that he plays. He's kind of like, he has rich kid syndrome, I guess. Not that his father, Brendan Gleeson, is super rich, but his father is a better actor than he is. I find him kind of weird. I don't like how he has this romantic appeal, probably because he's Irish. And so the best argument I can give for what I think about Domhnall Gleeson and his charisma void, aside from being on one of the lesser successful HBO Max shows called Run, is that if you look at his interview on James Corden for the Peter Rabbit movie, wherein an audience member gives Margot Robbie a rose, and Domhnall Gleeson takes it and aggressively chucks it away, is the perfect, he's a nice guy chat. I hate using nice guy as to describe a incel who tries to be a nice guy but isn't really, because they have sinister intentions, and it's who doesn't. But he's very much a nice guy pretending to be nice, or not nice guy pretending to be nice. And Oscar Isaac, super charismatic in that role. Alicia Vikander, very good. But I, again, don't like Alex Garland the way he writes the script. I find it hinges on Domhnall Gleeson being obtuse and making a stupid decision. And it's oh, surprise, the dumb decision you made came back to haunt you. What a shocker. And that's why I don't like the movie, because it hinges on characters making stupid decisions that, yeah, you explore the themes well, but it's done in, a dishonest way, where it's well, if I'm meant to relate to this story, and, I wouldn't have done that, I kind of turn it off. And it's well, the characters aren't meant to be realistic, it's supposed to serve da-da-da. It's okay, well, are the characters realistic, and we're supposed to relate to it, or is it supposed to serve a bigger theme? And it just kind of weaves in and out of that constantly, where you're just kind of relieved anytime somebody shows remotely human behavior, which is rare in Alex Garland movies, like when Oscar Isaac tears up the dance floor, Like, people show that on repeat all the time because it's the only moment that feels like true spontaneity. Um, Alex Garland's movies are like scripts recited by people, like a best man speech or something at a wedding, where the teller is just like overly prepared and overly focused on notes. Okay, you got to flow, you got to free flow. That's why I'm more interested in Civil War, because it feels like more free flowing, more improvisational. But anyways, Ex Machina, number 28. Okay, number 27. I will say, Crossing the Threshold is probably after Low Tide. Like, I sort of like this movie, Iron Claw. I do like this movie, although it's slow in parts. Ex Machina, I am entertained by this movie. This movie, this next one, goes a bit higher because of the sentiment of kind of like where I was at the time. It is not a rewatchable movie. It is the most anti-rewatchable movie in the world. I haven't seen it since I saw it in theaters. I never need to see it again. Spring Breakers. A nice candy-colored movie. Great performance by James Franco. Really good performance by Selena Gomez. It's a very improvisational movie. Vanessa Hudgens and Ashley Benson are also in it, along with Harmony Korine's wife. Harmony Korine directs it. Very candy color coded movie. One of A24's first movies that ended up being like a breakout success, because I don't know many distributors who they basically ran all their ads on like YouTube and digital media and didn't have a big spend. And that is basically the formula that they've been doing for most of their life as a distributor. And it has a lot of funny, interesting, wild moments in it. Britney Spears cover being the one. At 93 minutes or 94 minutes, it feels long, which is funny. The scenes kind of go on. There's a lot of pausing and stuff. And I feel that for the rest of his career, Harmony Korine has been trying to reproduce that. He did the movie The Beach Bum, which Neon, their competitor, ended up doing. And then that movie kind of had a bit of buzz and then kind of failed to materialize. And then he did a movie entirely in infrared called Agro Adrift, or Agro Drift. Um, uh, Again, it feels like he's repeating himself a bit. But Spring Breakers is a moment of time where I was at the end of my first year in university, and this was just starting, and I'm like, ooh, let me go see like an experimental film that would be different. So I went and saw it with a friend, and it was like just a memorable whole experience. So, I like it. I never intend to watch the movie again, but it has great images, some wild scenes in it, and I like the premise about basically girls on spring break who party and then kind of run out of money, and then they end up decide to commit robbery. Would I recommend watching it? Absolutely not, but it's like a movie you could probably Netflix and chill to. Number 26 is First Reform. This movie is by Paul Schrader, writer of Taxi Driver, and this mostly feels like the next step of his career. Now, granted, he's an older fella, in his 80s, basically, but like on his tombstone, it will read Paul Schrader, writer of Taxi Driver, writer-director of First Reformed. This is basically about a priest played by Ethan Hawke who starts to spiral out of control after he has kind of like an encounter with an unstable environmental activist and his pregnant wife. And it's kind of like a fascinating rumination on like how extremism is born. And I found it very fascinating. It's worth a watch for sure. Would I recommend it? I don't like the ending. And it was one of those I remember discussing with my dad of like, I think this movie is going to cop out. And my dad said, this guy who wrote Taxi Driver, no way is it going to cop out. Thinking that it would have the, bloody climax of Taxi Driver. And it doesn't. And I found it kind of predictable in that sense. And this is something of movies of the last 10 years have done, where it basically lines up all the pieces of something, can have a spectacular explosion of like euphoria or catharsis, and it holds off on that to try and like make some sort of point, when the point to me comes across as, yeah, they didn't have it in the budget, or they didn't have the stones to go through with it. And I feel that First Reformed onward, Paul Schrader kind of tries to recreate that with the card counter and Master Gardener, which I like, by the way, but it's a bit too slight. And I'd love for Paul Schrader to write a script that he can convince someone else to do, which I know is like, you write a script, it's your baby. You can make it on your own. Why would you give it to someone else to do? Because that's filmmaking. That's what filmmaking is about. He would never make a film, Paul Schrader, where somebody like fiddled with it again, such as he did with Taxi Driver. But like he's always kind of done his own thing. His next movie coming out at Cannes is called Oh Canada, and it stars that guy from Euphoria who is super tall, Jacob Elordi. I know him from The Kissing Booth, and let me tell you, he played like basically a freak in that movie who was like prone to violence, and it's a romantic comedy. Don't like his character at all. I've never seen Euphoria, but I imagine his character is pretty toxic on that too. So he played Elvis. So super toxic then. And then he was also in Saltburn, which is a completely disingenuous film. And you can tell in that because he plays a nice guy. I just kind of I don't like him. I find him too skinny, creeps me out. And he's like an example, at least of the characters he's playing. And he said this about his Kissing Booth character, at least, of just like, I find through the roles that he takes, condones a certain misogyny. And it's like, hey, you deal with the role that you're played, but that's why I'm excited to see O Canada, because Paul Schrader, when he wrote Taxi Driver, is like, I found myself as a youth being lost, and I was turning into somebody, and I was turning into somebody that I didn't like. And in order to get away from that somebody, I had to write who I was going to become. And that's what Taxi Driver is about. And it kind of confronts this, like, the misogyny and racism and evil underbelly of human soul within. And I guess Jacob Elordi is good casting for that, essentially, because maybe that underbelly will be confronted. And yeah, I look forward to that. And I also like how his movies are pretty short. First Reformed is 113 minutes. It's less than 2 hours. There's a quote by director Adam Wingard, who did Godzilla vs. Kong and its sequel, and he said, most stories need to be told within 2 hours. Get in and get out. If your movie is more than 2 hours, you better have a good reason for it. And, nobody told Zack Snyder that memo. But I do look forward to seeing Rebel Moon on Friday on Netflix, Part 2, The Scargiver. Moving on. First Reformed, interesting movie. Interesting themes, explored in a nice way. Don't like the ending, but it's overall it's well done. Would I recommend it? No. But smart movie. Free Fire. This is by Ben Wheatley. It's a British movie. Fantastic cast. I'm just going to read off some of them. Brie Larson, Charlotte Copley, Armie Hammer, who's good in it. He's kind of playing a role that like John Hamm should have played or would have played. Maybe if John Hamm was younger, broke through. Cillian Murphy, Jack Rayner is in it. Some other character actors, if you're big into British stuff, you would know Sam Riley, Noah Taylor. A guy who I could have sworn was Risa Fons, but isn't, Michael Smiley. And then also Patrick Bergin. I think it's such a great premise because it's just basically about a gun deal in like the 70s in Boston, which, it's a classic drug deal gone wrong movie, but they never leave the warehouse, and they just basically, it's a gun deal, so everybody is packing heat and shooting at each other and like missing or just getting people in the shoulder. And it's just such a great premise. Fun movie. Again, doesn't nail its ending. It's a common theme of basically all of A24's films, where it's like a big swing, but what a swing. So, it's admirable for that. But enjoyable movie. It's a 3 a.m. kind of Netflix movie I'd recommend watching, but it could be tightened up even more. A lot of these A24 movies, they have like a good premise. They're kind of underexplored, but like they either have a great premise or they have like ideas that they want to explore, and that seems to be what A24 is looking for. It's like show us the movie that nobody else will make, and we'll make it. A bit more conventional is number 24, Noah Baumbach and Jake Paltrow's De Palma, which is basically about the career of Brian De Palma, which Noah Baumbach, which you can see in White Noise, takes from a great inspiration to him. You would not think so, though, with a lot of Noah Baumbach's other movies, which are just basically domestic dramas. But he's a big student of De Palma, who's kind of like in the steps of Hitchcock and kind of in the an older uncle of Tarantino. De Palma, of course, directed Scarface. He directed Mission Impossible. He did a movie Dressed to Kill and Blowout. Wonderful movies. And he also did The Untouchables. And he's basically kind of out of the auteurs who they called the film brats of the 70s of Spielberg, Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola. He is kind of among them, but not quite as famous anymore and has kind of fallen off. My explanation for why directors do that, by the way, is because on many generations before, like with Billy Wilder, people give the example of the way filmmaking was done changed on them, and they didn't keep their finger on the pulse. You look at Martin Scorsese, the last two movies he did were streaming films. And he was like, big on the theatrical experience in cinema, but he did, sell out to keep his finger on the pulse. He did make him, he started off with Paramount, and they wanted to make like a sensible movie. And then in comes Netflix, and then in comes Apple, and they're like, "Well, we'll fund your weird movie," and they end up like, "Ooh, wow," get acclaimed and make a lot of people clap and get a lot of Oscar nominations, and then they end up winning nothing. Why? Because if he had been a bit more, a hair more collaborative with the studio, he probably could have made something a bit more appealing, which more people could have shared in. But De Palma is kind of the opposite, where it was always super slick and always into, the perversion, the cheap thrills. And he was very stylish at it. He was way more style than substance of the rest of his brethren. And my opinion on what happened with him is just that, similar to Spielberg, uh, the type of stories that he wants to tell are just not as appealing to a wide audience anymore. I think if he went somewhere and dusted off some, AFI graduate of film school script and or wrote his own script or something that some graduate then did, I think he would make a comeback. But you get older, you have successes, your successes carry you. He probably makes a lot of residuals on, Mission Impossible and The Untouchables. He doesn't need to work again. But if he did, and I were him, I would, work with some young guy or something. Like take somebody else's script and style it up, because there are people, ripping him off. There's a movie called Cam that like totally kind of takes from his style. I didn't like it at all, but it's kind of like it's a take. Somebody can go watch that movie. It's that movie. Cam has high Rotten Tomatoes, high critic score, low audience score energy. Yeah, De Palma, good kind of little tidbit on who this guy was and the successful movies that he had and the arc and trajectory of his career. Well done by Noah Baumbach. Number 23 is Eighth Grade. This is another, Bo Burnham has something to say and is going to say it. It's his only film as of now. And it's just about a girl in eighth grade. And millennial core kind of depressed life, woe is me, even though we're living in like the safest and best time to be alive. It's just like wallow in it, kind of porn. It's why I don't like it. Why is it so high? I guess because there aren't many movies that deal with the technology of today, and this was a movie that did that, and it did it through a lens of like a 13-year-old. Um, and I'm also really fascinated by people who, make content that not a lot of people watch. I guess like for me, in the content era of like social media, um, I'm making this because I love it, but there are people who kind of do it as an appointment. And like five people watch. Like some other people who I've collaborated with, they don't have high viewership. They do it because they love it. That part I understand. But then there are people who kind of like treat it as work and they kind of go after it, but the results aren't there. For me, if I do a project and nobody watches it, it's like, okay, that's done. I'm like Steven Spielberg on West Side Story. I made my first musical, nobody watched it, so I'm done making musicals. That's me. Um, so I was fascinated in this character's point of view, and I thought it had a good message overall. But it was kind of boring. Honestly, why did I rank this higher? Really, it should be, number 35 or something like that. But this list isn't perfect. There are a few where it's like, oh, is this better than that, really? And you can always split hairs when ranking movies. But nonetheless, I did like the message behind Eighth Grade. Um, it shows how Bo Burnham is a pretty careful artist. I'd like for him to like make another movie because whichever movie he makes will be better than this one, I think. Maybe you should direct for hire or something like that. But yeah, his career is fascinating to me. Like, what does he do for a living? Like, does he still do stand up and all that? The way that a lot of people do their work now, I'm so fascinated because back in the 70s up to the 2000s, filmmakers would make a movie every 2 years. The only people now in the modern era who like crank one out all the time are like Taylor Swift for music, who's like on a schedule similar to the Beatles when they were together, where it's like every 18 months, it's like something's cooking. It's like a factory, and it's a good factory, a well-made factory. But not many people do that, aside from Guy Ritchie, who has a movie coming out this Friday, Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Um, Last month, he came out with a TV show where he directed several episodes of, which was an adaptation of The Gentleman, which he made in 2019. Or it came out in 2020, January, right before the pandemic. And it was part of a string of movies that he made after Aladdin, where if you work with Disney and show that you can work with Disney and make a decent, I'll say it's a decent movie for the sake of the argument. It's too rehashing of the original Aladdin, but it was a big hit, and it proved that he could work kind of with everybody. And he goes and he makes The Gentleman, and then he makes Wrath of Man, and then he makes The Covenant, and I'm probably missing a movie uh, in there. And now I gotta look it up because it's like I know he's made a lot of movies in in that time, like this decade. He's made a lot. Am I wrong? Is that an exaggeration, or there's got to be one that I'm missing? Operation Fortune, Ruse de Guerre. Now that movie was developed for a long time and then came out later, so we had those movies open within a month of each other. But basically, since 2019, he has made let me see, one, two, three, four, five, six, six movies and a television show. Um, did he? Yeah. Did he? Yeah. Well, that makes sense. So how many movies is that? That's like okay, 5 years. He's made one, two, three, 4, 5, 6 movies. 6 movies in 5 years is high. I will not lie. That is a lot. But you know what? He's one of those directors like Darren Aronofsky who has made like his first movie Pi was very Jewish, and I don't know if he found God or something, but as his movies go on, he makes more Christian and Christian movies, which, as a Christian, I guess appeal to me, even though I find church boring. I appeal more to Darren Aronofsky, I guess. Um, with Guy Ritchie, he makes more and more like guy films of like my sensibilities, I guess. Like his early gangster films, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, Snatch, Rock and Rolla, I don't really like. But then he goes out and he does Sherlock Holmes, which I don't like, but I like Sherlock Holmes too. And that's kind of like a taste of, oh, if I make popular movies that people actually want to watch, it's better for my career and I hone my skills a bit. And that's basically what I want all of these A24 directors to do, to go out, they've made their experimental movies, go and play ball with the studios, make that, you know, derivative crap that, you know, you detest to test yourself as a filmmaker. Because I guarantee you, you'll find a success and you'll find a better filmmaker and you'll discover something. You might even make a better film than you made before. And, you know, people, it doesn't have to be derivative. What if it's good? What if it, you know, has some ideas in it? Like, what if you make it special? You know, Ben Affleck talks about that. That's what I want filmmakers to take from this list. Um, Moving on, we have Pearl, which is the second film in the X trilogy by horror director Ty West. This is takes place 100 years ago. Um, it's a prequel to his previous film X, about a woman named Pearl who wants to be a movie star and is from a small town. And it's just basically sort of like a slasher horror film. I believe there's like a killer on the prowl, but it's like this. Trapped in her family's isolated farm, Pearl must tend to her ailing father under the bitter and overbearing watch of her devout mother. Lusting for a glamorous life, she's seen in the movies, Pearl's ambitions, temptations, and repressions all collide in the stunning Technicolor-inspired origin story of X's iconic villain. Now, what's so fascinating about this trilogy is that it's a fascinating commingling of like how sex and violence mix on film, and it's told really well. The third movie in the trilogy, Maxine, comes out this year. 4th of July, same spot that Midsummer came out, so I'm sure it'll be a hit. And it's the third in a trilogy as well of movies that are popular with kids on the internet, mainly because it features that shot of Jenna Ortega walking onto the bed or crawling onto the bed in her underwear that X has, and this is like the prequel to that. So I don't know if that translates to people actually watching these movies, but they're well done. X and Pearl, good midnight movies to watch. It was actually available at TIFF Midnight Festival, but it was on a streaming service afterwards, early afterwards, I think, or I intended to catch it on that. So I'm just kind of like, I don't have a lot of money here at Toronto Film Festival. I'll go see something else. But when I did see it, I did enjoy Pearl, and I look forward to Maxine. And X was one of my favorite movies the year it came out. It'll appear on this list later. Number 21, Slow West. This is like a hangout movie. It's a Western starring Michael Fassbender, Cody Smith McPhee, who was in The Road. He played Nightcrawler. It stars Ben Mendelsohn as well. And the premise is just in the Old West, a 17-year-old Scottish boy teams up with a mysterious gunman to find the woman with whom he is infatuated. The woman is played by Karen Pistorius. Roy McCann from Game of Thrones, who played the Mountain, is in it. And it's just a classic Western movie of like people who are going to a place and converge on a place. And I have the memory in my head of the climax of this movie, which takes place out in the plains in like the middle of nowhere at a house, is where the final shootout is. And it kind of lets off a bit in the final, but it's one of those movies where if you watch it, you're like, oh, this is a good movie that, if done by somebody who wasn't as good, wouldn't be entertaining. So it's like you see the skill on display of like storytelling. And the director, John McClane, has done a few other films, none of which mostly are all like experimental. One is like a short, Man on a Motorcycle with Michael Fassbender. But I'd love for him to do something else. And I look forward to it because Slow Less is one of those movies that you can catch on streaming, watch, and like. I can like recommend it just as I recommend Pearl. Because as we get in, we're approaching the bottom 20 here. These are all like watchable movies where I can recommend you watch it and you'll probably like them, with a few exceptions. Number 20 is Room. This is a movie about a girl who is raised in a room and raises her child in a room after being captured by, a sexual predator. And, Brie Larson won Best Actress for it and essentially has not made up for that in her career. She is content doing crypto commercials and playing Captain Marvel, which I guess good for her. Um, there's something about this movie that I don't like, but I can't put my finger on it, even though Emma Donahue's story is good. I'm not people criticize the direction of this movie by Lenny Abramson. I find the direction like sort of fine, but there's something about it which is lacking, which I don't like, and I don't want to go back and see the movie. Maybe it's because it's depressing. Maybe it's because it feels long. It's under 2 hours. It kind of has a bit of an epic sweep to it, which I love. Like the room is the kid's whole world, so it feels big, and that's what people don't like about it. But I liked it. But it's kind of a movie you like and forget. There isn't a lot of staying power to it. A movie that on number 19, Kosan Vibe, Kosan Vibes. I did not see it in theaters like I did Room, which again came out when I was in university, so that's why I saw it then. But Minari has a very positive vibe to it, and not a lot happens in the movie. It's kind of a tale of the director Lee Isaac Chung and his growing up as a Korean family in Arkansas. It hits on similar themes that The Farewell does, about this kind of like immigrant stories that are kind of like Americanized, about like the new wave of immigrants and people kind of telling their story. Past Lives is similar to that. And I like those stories. I still feel the best one is yet to come. But Minari, it's well acted, it's well directed. Not a lot happens in the movie, so you know, it's not one I would fully recommend. But like, it's a movie where after having watched it, you're like, yeah, that follows the story steps. That's well directed. That's well done. So I'll give it that. Number 18 is a tough movie to get through. It's The Lobster by Yorgos Lanthimos. It's one that he wrote himself. This guy directed Poor Things and The Favorite. This is kind of more pure him because it's a story in the dystopian future about single people who, according to the laws of the city, are taken to the hotel where they are obliged to find a romantic partner in 45 days, or they are transformed into beasts and sent off into the woods. How the hell do you tell that story? You do it through this guy's very specific lens, and the movie is a slog because you really have to invest in it. It's very slow paced, but I find it pays off quite well. Um, it was nominated for Best Screenplay, and it's a good screenplay, and it has good actors in it. But it's one of those movies, like many on this list, that really test your patience. It's a good performance by Colin Farrell. It is very romantic and like tragic and depressing, but there's a point to it. So yeah, I like it. Number 17 is a movie whose premise I like more than the execution of the movie, which feels like it's designed to piss you off. Like, it opens with an extended cut of two girls very, like, sloppily making out. So it feels, like, very annoying. Which is funny because it's supposed to be, like, a send up of, safe spaces of, like, millennial and Gen Z culture. It's written by somebody who doesn't quite completely grasp. They have a good idea and they do a good enough job on the script, but the script's the weakest element of it. They don't completely grasp the language of Gen Z. So it's kind of annoying of like, you see this in movies a lot now where they throw out phrases or try and be woke, which is the biggest complaint about wokeism in general that I have in movies, is that wokeism is a good thing, okay? The reason you don't like it is because it's done poorly, okay? If you notice that a movie is being woke, it's because it's bad, okay? If you think that a movie is bad or a TV show is bad because it's telling a story that would be perfectly serviceable if a man had been in it, then it's probably not as done well, which is why I gave Fallout a 6.9. Do I think it's trying to be woke? No. But it's not a story where it's like, oh, this is Lucy's story. It's like, oh, Amazon coming to them and say, we need this to appeal to people. Let's do this. And that's kind of like, in part, the backwards notions that Disney has pushed forward, which is very well intentioned. You really want to appeal to new people and tell stories that haven't been told. But when you're carbon copying like white stories, it's not as entertaining. This movie is like an interesting send up of that because it's basically about a certain group of young people and it looks down on them, and it's in a funny way, but it approaches it in a humor a tad too seriously, and then kind of when somebody tells a joke, and it doesn't go off very well, and they're like, "I'm joking," or they're super serious and they realize it performs badly in their take, so then they pull off and be like, "I was joking." This is that movie. It's well directed. It feels very long. The characters are very annoying in it, and usually I don't like those movies. And for the most of the running time of this movie, I didn't like it. I kind of had to slog through it, but it has a point to it, which similar to the movie Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, which is about two girls who travel to get an abortion. It is the most woke movie ever, um, but it's guys incels, again, I'm using these terms loosely, hate it because all of the white guys in the movie suck. All of the guys in that movie suck. They're all hateable. And there aren't many, like, the white guys in this movie suck too. And they're not treated super well. So obviously, if you're a super sensitive white guy who either kind of hates movies or you have some isms within you, you'll hate woke storytelling, I guess. But let me tell you that the reason you hate, wokeism is because it's bad writing. I'll give you an example. X-Men Dark Phoenix is written by, at the time, like a 45-year-old guy who doesn't understand, what being woke means. So he has Jennifer Lawrence talk about, like, you should try changing the name to X women, and it's like a very early 2000s you go girl kind of moment. And that's the issue with wokeism, is that, like, you're taking a you go girl approach to a movie. It's like Nikki Haley, presidential candidate, Republican failed candidate Nikki Haley, saying, like, yeah, I know exactly where to kick a man in the balls, and because I wear heels it hurts more, like that kind of thing. Apologize for the cringeness of that delivery. I wasn't trying to do an impression, but you get what I mean. The reason people throw the word woke around is because they've watched all of this, like, Disney garbage of, like, essentially anti-movies that are product commercials for their Disney rides, and as movies they suck, and they suck, and then people go, oh, they're trying to be woke, and it's like, yeah, they're trying to be woke because they don't understand what woke is. They don't understand that you cannot transplant a story of, like, a little white girl and then, play the card of, like, oh, well, we're trying to be representative of black girls so that, black women can see, their stories and, believe in themselves like they didn't before. But at the same time, carbon copy everything about that original character's identity and then transplant it. The reason I use The Little Mermaid as an example is because The Little Mermaid remake is absolute garbage. The director was the wrong person to tell the story, Rob Marshall. He didn't tell the story well, and he didn't know special effects wise how to make it so the movie looks like muck. It is a carbon copy of the original, and it's just a poorly told story. And that basically goes for many of the movies from 2019 of Disney on, where they basically had so much success, they decided to stop making actual movies and just start making like theme park rides that Martin Scorsese talks about. Um, and that's the issue with wokeism, is that it's become a thing. It's become co-opted, and wokeness at its core is, to use the example of Get Out, which I believe kind of coined it for the popular narrative because it uses the childish Gambino song "Stay Woke." It is about being aware of where we are as a culture and what the reality is. And you don't do that by like manufacturing a fake reality, built on a carbon copy of something else. You don't like stand on the shoulders of giants to like tell a story that's just an echo. And that's basically the issue of why all these guys on the internet, get mad at Brie Larson for Captain Marvel and whatnot. They're not mad. Their anger is misplaced. You're not angry at Brie Larson because she's just an actor in a movie. You should be angry at the filmmakers uh, and the studio for making those movies, but they like harness these hateful, bilish men, just kind of like focus their hatred on the easiest target. Who is that? That's like the actor. And they, send a bunch of hatred to the actor. Star Wars with the character of Rose Tico sent a bunch of hatred to Kelly Marie Tran. These guys are so stupid, they do not know that the actor is playing a character. And Kiefer Sutherland, in an interview with Vanity Fair, who I listened to, he's like, it's a foolish thing, but people take their culture seriously. They take film seriously. And he's had people who have not shaken his hand because of a character he played in a movie. These are the people that we are living with. And it's so sad that they are the ones, because of the way that these algorithms work, are we have to engage with most, because hate engagement, that kind of passion wins out. And so we just have to deal with people who frankly do not like the stuff that they are watching, and just basically have to make their suffering about it everyone's business. Um, Now, there's a theme that could be like explored in a movie better, that this just scratches the surface of. But for its telling, it's just basically Bodies, Bodies, Bodies is about these people who basically live in their phones on their screens and can't survive anywhere else. And for that, I think it's quite pointed. I like the overall point it makes. Do I think it's that funny? No. I think it's deliberately annoying? Yes. Would I recommend it the same as I would Room or Slow West or Pearl? No. But I do think it has something to say and could only have been told, in the last few years. So it's like unique in that sense. So I'll give it a pass. Maybe it's one of those movies that like warmed on me. Um, and I think about more, and that's why I want to play it better. But yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about why didn't this movie make more money, I mean, it's because it wasn't like mass appealing, and it was a big hit, but it again has high Rotten Tomatoes energy of the critics love it. People who actually watch movies for fun didn't like it as much, but it's worth slogging through. Number 16 Past Lives worth slogging through? I would say no. It's well done, well structured, well acted for two-thirds of its characters, I would say. I think the main female lead is a bit miscast because she's supposed to be playing somebody who knows Korean a bit better, but is supposed to be rusty. I didn't buy it. The main character of the movie, Nora. Nora from Queens, like Aquafina, that Greta Lee plays. I did not buy her as somebody who has grown up in Korea. Um, maybe she has. I've looked at her profile like 10 times. Um, uh, but like I did not find that she knew the language very well. Um, and it's a movie that is heavily spoken in Korean, and yeah, she's it. I love that we're at a point in culture where essentially you look at these people who represent visually various backgrounds of like Asian and Indian and whatnot. But they're not actually that. They're more American than they are Indian. They're more American than they are Asian or Korean. And I love that. One of the movies that I was fascinated by is the Johnny Depp film Minamata. And that movie is entirely spoken in English and takes place in Japan. And Hiroyuki Sanada, who I mentioned earlier, is speaks English in that movie. It's a decent movie because it's about like a social issue and whatnot. But I said to my dad while watching that movie, this is a movie that only could have been made a few years ago because it's made by people who visually, represent the Asian community, but are, Americanized enough or know English enough that they can communicate and act well in a different language. And that basically takes a film that ordinarily would be subtitled and is acted, you know, um, in English, but acted pretty decently. And that's kind of what I honestly would have hoped they would have done for um, Shogun, because Shogun is like, it's a bit too subtitled for me. It's too much about the spoken language. It's not visual enough. It has a few interesting visual ideas that doesn't iterate on. But, nonetheless, isn't it great that we're so connected as a culture that we can have these discussions about these movies where people who are American play Asian or another culture, and they're visually represented and tell a different story that we haven't seen, and they're able to communicate that to us. I just kind of like it. As for Past Lives itself, interesting premise that basically has enough material to make up the subplot of a movie that is stretched to be like 106 minutes. This was a movie where again it's well framed, it's decently acted, the script and direction are good, but there's just not enough story there. That like even though it does everything perfectly, and the craft is to be admired. Frankly, I'm surprised I have it so high. Again, I need some of these to shuffle around. But I guess for its craft, it places number 16. Number 15 is The Whale, which I saw with my buddy Eric in theaters. He asked me to go see it, and I kind of knew that it was going to be divisive slash not good. And Darren Aronofsky makes those films, but as I mentioned, he was kind of on a track where he's like more Christian in his messaging, and weirdly that like clicks with me. Like I didn't like had he made The Fountain now, which is a movie with a dope premise but kind of flounders it. If he made that movie now, and maybe he could as like a TV show or something, it would be better. Just because not because it directly aligns with my sensibilities, but this guy gets more in touch with his filmmaking language as it goes on. And I have to say, I like The Whale because it's about writing, and I fancy myself a writer. And it's about if you say something for whatever it is, even if it's not, deep, because the movie isn't that deep. If you say something and you say it and it's honest, then that counts for something and that matters. That trumps above all else. And to me, that's like the message of the film because the movie's script is not that great. The character played by Sadie Sink and Ty Simpkins, Hong Chow, all of them, they don't have like depth to any of their characters. Samantha Morton is in it as the ex-wife as well. None of these characters have any depth to them, and a few of them are phenomenally like working overtime to be unlikable. Which could it be misogyny? I hate to trot that out all the time, but it's like particular now. Maybe I'm being university brained about it, but I tend to notice these movies when it's like they have like a bitchy, unlikable character in it. It's probably because that writer is basing off of a character in real life who they think is a bitch. And that doesn't make the movie or TV show that you're watching pleasant to watch. And, it's hard to write what you know, but a lot of these times it feels like these characters are working out their own issues on screen. So, if the movie has any weaknesses, it's that. But I bought into the film's message, is what I'm saying. Would I recommend The Whale? No. But it's kind of like a fun movie to watch and forget. The music is amazingly good. for a movie that does not necessarily need to have good music. Like Clint Mansell has a lot of dope themes. This director, Darren Aronofsky, gets the most out of them. Enough said. Number 14 is In Fabric. This is by a director named Peter Strickland, who's done a few of these kind of weird, offset, sexually 70s kind of Italian giallo film throwbacks. And this is just like a well written movie that is well written in such a way that it basically gets you to care about like a movie about a dress which you wouldn't care about at all. And Marianne Jean Baptiste is the lead. It's just basically about a woman who tries a dress on. It's like a ghost story set in a department store about a cursed dress as it passes from person to person. And again, it's just well done by Peter Strickland. This is a movie where you watch it, it's well edited, it's edited at a decent pace, it has a point to it, the performances are good. Everything about this movie kind of works, and it's just a small indie film done well by a skilled filmmaker. In Fabric, I watched it in my room when I had my nothing but a TV antenna, and I was flipping through the channels and I was catching a movie just as it was starting. And it's not a movie that I ever would have probably chosen to watch on my own. And if I did, it would have been the wrong choice because anytime you force yourself to watch a movie as homework, you don't enjoy it. So this movie I caught on TV, and as good TV does, it pulls you in. And I liked it. Number 14, totally deserved. Number 13 is a movie. We're starting again the movies that I like. Even that I'd watch if I didn't do films as a job. Mississippi Grind. This is one of Ryan Reynolds' best performances, co-starring Ben Mendelsohn. So you have Talos and Deadpool hanging out. It's basically about a guy who is a gambling addict, but might be good at his job, and Ryan Gosling, who just likes to gamble for fun. It's a road movie. These guys, they play cards together. It's directed by Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck, who made Captain Marvel. And they've always tiptoe on the edge of making like good movies. Half Nelson is a movie which got Ryan Gosling his first Oscar nomination. They directed that. It's about a drug addict. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of a funny story. On the edge of being a good movie, Captain Marvel, on the edge of being a good movie, tiptoes into, I'd say, being at least decent entertainment. This is my favorite film of theirs. Um, it's Jerry is a talented but down on his luck gambler whose fortunes begin to change when he meets Curtis, played by Ryan Reynolds, a younger, highly charismatic poker player. The two strike up an immediate friendship, and Jerry quickly persuades his new friend to accompany him on a road trip to a legendary high stakes poker game in New Orleans. And as they make their way down the Mississippi River, Jerry and Curtis manage to find themselves in just about every bar, racetrack, casino, and pool hall they can find, experiencing both incredible highs and dispiriting lows, but ultimately forging a deep, genuine bond that will stay with them long after their adventure is over. This is a Bond movie, a movie where two characters like basically get to know each other. And I like those in romantic ways, like in the movie Monsters, that Gareth Edwards did, or non-romantic buddy movies like this that are kind of like romance movies in their own. Mississippi Grind is inspired by California Split, a Robert Altman movie, which I watched, and this movie kind of perfectly remakes in the style of, as I mentioned, Fallout, where it's like it has the vibe with a new setting and new characters. So it's kind of like a stealth remake. Um, I like this movie. It's a good hangout movie. It's a good movie to watch. I like the characters. I like spending time with them. I like the little episodes that they go on, the escapades, as just good back and forth dialogue. I recommend this movie to people often. Okay, we are getting down to it. Number 12 is X. This is the movie that starts off the trilogy, which follows Pearl is next, which it's the prequel to, it is a prequel of, and then you have Maxine coming out this fall. This movie stars, why am I forgetting names? Why am I getting to the age now? I don't like it. Mia Goth as Maxine Minx, as well as Pearl, and it's just basically Kid Cudi is in it, or is it Kid Cudi? Somebody let me know. Jenna Ortega, Brittany Snow, and it's just basically a horror movie from Ty West, who's done a lot of horror movies. Sam Levinson, the creeper that he is, who did Euphoria, also did it. Of course, it's about sex. X. It's basically about a porn crew who goes out to an isolated locations, think like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre house, next to an abandoned barn, and they film an adult film. And they kind of ask for permission, but the owners, who are two old folks, kind of they don't tell them exactly what they're doing. They just tell them that they're filming a movie. And when the old people peek in and find out, they don't like what they find. So it's kind of like an interesting movie that's well written, nice little throwback horror film, one of the best horror films of the decade, next to Barbarian. And yeah, I it was one of my top films of 2022, and I think that was the year where I made my first like top 25 list. I'll have to look at it. Um, but yeah, it's a movie that I like. It's well acted. It's well performed. It's well directed. I would 100% recommend it to anybody. I'm really looking forward to I'm really looking forward to the sequel, Maxine. And yeah, it was number 17 on my list. Did any A24 films of that year rank higher? Um, the answer is no. Bodies, Bodies, Bodies was a bit after that, and that was 20 films that I had made and ranked that year. Sorry for doing that into the mic. Number 11 is The Florida Project. This is a movie that takes place just outside of Disneyland, and it's about basically the projects wherein people live. Willem Dafoe is great in it. He would have made a fine Best Supporting Actor win that year. And this is one of those movies, again, similar to In Fabric, where you're like, wow, this filmmaker is on fire. They managed to get me to care about something I wouldn't have cared about otherwise. It's well written. It's fascinating because it's from the perspective of children, and just kind of how close as a kid you don't realize how you are to danger, but because you're a kid you don't care. And I find yourselves really caring for the well-being of these kids who are kind of like hanging around this dangerous place. The problem with this movie is that in the last 90 seconds, it completely ruins the film by kind of going on to this fantastical thing. And while the movie should essentially be an indictment of Disneyland and the race to the bottom, um, ethics of capitalism, and all the, you know, people wonder why we see so many homeless people, and you see the most amount of homeless people in large cities where there is great wealth disparity. Because when people tend to congregate and there's like an excess amount of wealth, people tend to flock to that. So there's like a major homeless population. And so you basically go and you see these like wealth disparity, and this movie kind of chronicles that in a really good way. And I was so on this movie, and then it just the last 90 seconds I hate so much. And they try and make it turn it into like an FU, or the filmmakers say that it's like an FU to Disney, but it's a 100% an endorsement in a way that completely betrays the like 111 minutes that came before. So I really like it. I arguably like it more than my number 10 pick, but because it betrays itself in the last 90 seconds, I cannot abide. Number 10, Dream Scenario. Saw this recently. This was a movie that was well talked about. It has a great premise, which I'd thought of before, of like, what if everybody who saw each other in their dreams was connected? It's about one night everybody has starts dreaming about Nicolas Cage, as this who's this kind of university professor. It's filmed around Toronto, you can tell, but it's this professor Paul Matthews who finds his life turned upside down when everybody sees him in his dreams, and then the dreams eventually take a nightmarish turn. I didn't expect this movie to explore like the other side of the Me Too era of like accountability in kind of like a fun way. It does what sci-fi should do, which is it takes a sci-fi premise to explore a social issue in a very like entertaining way. And I don't agree with the politics of it, really, but it's fascinating to me because it like explores it in just such a fun way of like it it does so in a way that it's like if you wanted to make an apology for like being me too'd or something like that. Like, how can you get people to empathize with somebody like that? Well, you use this sci-fi premise to explore it. I know I probably didn't sell the film well at all to you, and that's fine because honestly, this is not a movie that you can sell to somebody really. People tried to sell it to me at TIFF, and they're like, "Oh, you got to see this movie," but I didn't know if it was like all hype because I do not like falling victim to hype. People watch movies and I watch movies and I have my own opinions on whether I like them or not, and I'm usually like pretty good at following my instincts. And then, you have these what they call coworker movies that come about and people are like, "Oh man, you need to see this movie," and you watch it and it's like complete shit because it's recommended from a guy who's seen 5 movies in his life. I try to avoid those like the plague. And when you go to Toronto International Film Festival, of course they're known for having a film savvy audience, but I didn't know at the time, is this like a coworker movie or is this like an actual good movie? Because it has a delicious premise, and Nicolas Cage is weird. But yeah, I did end up liking the movie. I thought it explored social issues well, and hilariously enough, 5 minutes after I finished watching this movie, Kevin Spacey came out with an interview as Frank Underwood from House of Cards, with an interview with Tucker Carlson, and it's just such a wild interview. It was at Christmas. It was my Christmas Eve movie, which of course we always, my family, everybody comes home for the holidays, and we always end up seeing a Nicolas Cage movie on Christmas Eve. It's kind of funny. We don't try to, but he's just in enough movies that's how it is. I actually watched a Nicolas Cage movie recently, The Retirement Plan. Shout out to Tim Brown, who directed it. Went to Carleton University. Hope to work with you, Tim. You can adapt my script, Safe Spaces, or you can adapt Saluda, which I'm looking forward to. But if you're listening to this, ask me about it. Um, Number 9 film, The Spectacular Now. This is a movie I saw in theaters at the perfect time, and it's a perfect, high school romance movie. It's directed by James Ponsoldt, who did End of the Tour, and it stars Miles Teller, who is perfectly cast as kind of a likable a-hole, and Shailene Woodley, who is perfectly cast as kind of like girl next door, and it's their ups and downs. It is so small in terms of like its scope, and it's kind of from the writers of 500 Days of Summer, who also wrote The Disaster Artist, which they got Oscar nominated for. I like this script of theirs better. It's just a kind of slice of life relationship movie, drama, kind of good mix of light and heavy drama. It is, when you kind of look back, it's a bit timeless of a movie on how people sort of lived in the early 2010s, like as a time capsule. I feel like this movie is. And it's also a good companion piece with Miles Teller to Project X, which came out around the same time. This is a 95-minute movie. It glides along pretty well. Um, it is pretty tired in its dissection of like alcoholism and stuff like that. In a way, I find it like leans on that drama a bit. It has a hell of a jump scare, uh, and is kind of also about toxic relationships. So though it doesn't hammer you over the head with it, but I remember seeing it. My brother had recommended it to me, and I went and I saw it in theaters, and I went home and wrote one of my first major reviews on it on FilmGamer.com. And I related to the characters, even though Miles Teller is older than me, I related to the character a lot. And it's kind of speaks to a time of romance, so I'm very nostalgic about it. It could have been better, but it's not a movie that I need to see again. It was just, it has good vibes, it has good performances, it's well written. It's one of A24's early movies, along with my number 8 film. Um, but yeah, The Spectacular Now, I like it. Worth watching once. I would recommend to it. If you don't like it, I get it. It's, to an audience that's not me, and again, I'm going to get university brained here, that it's like, you know, white male perspective, pretty basic romance, and it's a movie that a lot of film bros will like discover for themselves and hold in high regard. But it even though it's like a pretty, basic follow the steps kind of movie. I just enjoy it. It's an enjoyable movie, even though it wallows in depression the same as a lot of like millennial movies about millennials do. But it wallows in a way that's like romantic. It feels kind of like the vibe of Where the Crawdads Sing. Now I would say that would probably be a decent movie that James Ponsoldt could have done. And James Ponsoldt, if you're looking for work, adapt the author of Where the Crawdads Sing life story without telling her, because let me tell you, it's exactly like Where the Crawdads Sing. Exactly. Okay. Yes, there's a murder involved. Um, yeah, do it. Number 8. Oh, and one thing I wanted to say about when I wrote that review. So I go out to like the 9 o'clock showing of The Spectacular Now. I go out by myself in Ottawa, and then I kind of wander back. I'm kind of on this romantic high, and thinking about life and romances in my life and stuff like that. And I get home around midnight, and then I write my review, and I write like a full, well thought out review. This is back when I wrote reviews all in one night, which I haven't done in a while. I don't know, am I getting older? Um, and I finish at about 2:30 in the morning, and my roommate is still listening to music at the time. And I was living with a rough group of people at the time. Like, not rough in terms of their characters, but I did not get along with the people that I lived with. And I was super tired and wanted to go to bed and could only hear my roommate's music, who was playing it loud. And I'm like, I don't know. I play video games late. I don't want people knocking on my door saying you can't do that, which had happened to me earlier in the year in that same house. So I'm just kind of like I've been up late. I stay up late myself. I want to be able to keep doing that. I don't want to walk on eggshells, but I felt like I had to say something. So I wrote out a note to my roommate, slipped it under the door of like, I know this is, cool. This is your thing and you're enjoying yourself, but please be mindful of the time, blah, blah, blah. I slip it under the door, go back into my room, and then close the door. Immediately, I hear the wheels of the desk chair roll back in my roommate's room, stop, gets up, goes to the door, picks up the note that I gave, opens the door. I clear it. I hear it whip open, and then he knocks on my door, and he's like, "Did you write this?" And I go, "Yes." And he goes, "Okay, if I am listening to music loud and it is bothering you, that is a you problem." And that is also like a perfect summation of like a lot of problems in university, particular with roommates, of like me problem versus you problem. Um, I do credit my second year with me becoming more observant of other people around me. Kind of in a worse way. I have to say, I'm nostalgic for the time when I was more oblivious because I was more confident back then. Um, but yeah, it was a tough time living in second year. And people like to say, your frontal lobe develops in your 20s. I guess that was like a time where I had to become radically sensitized to the people around me. But basically, I'm just kind of like, yes, that is me. And he gets mad and slams the door, goes back in, but he keeps his music off. And then next time I confront him, I'm in the cafeteria. And he's like, "Hey, man, I was like drinking. I wasn't in a good place. It was that and that." I'm like, "No, no, no." But we needed to have that conversation. Okay, I'm glad that we had that conversation because I'd rather not have that conversation in my head. So me and him kind of became closer after that. Shout out to you, buddy. And yeah, I wrote that review, and after I'd finished the review, it was 2:30 in the morning, and I confronted him with a note of, and I felt like a hypocrite for it. But again, the best movies remind you of a time in your life or happen during a time in your life when you watch them. And that's what that movie did for me. So The Spectacular Now hit with maximum effect. And in first year, I had watched another A24 movie, Obvious Child, which, at the end of the year, people are recommending the best movies that they've seen. And this was around the time when it wasn't so calculated as it is now, where everything gets analyzed to death before it comes out and has a birth, life, and death in the first week it comes out. Around this time, that Obvious Child came out by Julian Robespierre, in 2014. So I guess I was in second year, or I believe I was in my third when I saw it because I saw it much later on. This is a movie about a woman who gets pregnant and immediately, smartly decides, I'm going to get rid of the baby. And it's a short movie that is as long as it needs to be. It's 84 minutes long. It's a comedy that is, in my opinion, like the right amount of comedy, the way to do dramedy, because it's optimistic. I haven't seen Julian Robespierre's other movie, Landline, and she hasn't done much other than that. She did do the television shows, Mrs. Fletcher for HBO, and she did do the television series A Teacher, which made the rounds on TikTok a lot. It's probably one of those shows where you see entirely through TikTok, or most of it that you're gonna see. So, anyways, it's a nice, light-hearted comedy, um, and that's why I like it. And I saw it at the perfect time in my life. I rented it from the library, the university library. So it's a movie that I'd recommend. Obvious Child, watch it. Watch it with your girlfriend. Watch it with your wife. Watch it Netflix and chill. Watch it by yourself. Yeah, it's a perfect streaming movie or a movie to rent that you can watch at home alone. All right. Number 7. We're getting down to it right now. A most violent year. There aren't many gangster crime movies of the modern era of high quality that have come out in my lifetime. You'll see American Gangster is really the only other one. And so I have American Gangster and I have this, both suitably well done, well acted movies with great period detail in them. This is the first collaboration between Jessica Chastain and Oscar Isaac, who at the time hadn't worked together but went to Juilliard together, so she recommended him. And they play a husband and wife. He is a furnace owner of a furnace company, a heating company, and basically he's being squeezed out by his competitors. And his name is Abel Morales, so he has a lot of morals, and he basically gets pushed against and pushed to his limit. And it takes place in the 80s in New York, in one of the coldest and most violent years of crime on record. It is written and directed by J.C. Chandor, who was Oscar nominated for his script for Margin Call, a movie which you will see frequent clips of on TikTok, which has a murder's row of cast and is a great movie that I've rewatched. It's just a very pleasant, enjoyable movie. Margin Call. His second movie that he did was called All Is Lost, starring Robert Redford, where he is lost at sea and contemplating if all is lost. The fascinating difference between those two movies was one movie is all exposition and dialogue, Margin Call, and All Is Lost is completely silent. This is the movie that he followed up afterward. And the movie gets some criticism for Jessica Chastain's character not being that heavily written. However, I find that the way that she performs it and the look of the character, her suits were very important. They were all vintage and handpicked by her. Um, that character of hers is beefed up considerably well. Um, the weird thing that I'll say is that this movie feels like the kind of movie where it's done and it's done pretty well, and then maybe 30 or 40 years from now, probably less, considering at the pace at which Hollywood goes now, it will be remade in some form of another. Either a TV show where, again, they take a whole season to get to the real story, and then it's like, and then it's a most violent year at the end. Whoa. Or they do it as a play, well, because it wouldn't actually make a very good play, or it's like an interactive video game drama, or there's a comic book spinoff. I don't know. But it's a very well done gangster picture that's well written, everything falls into place. It's fascinating because I remember seeing it in theaters and going out to it and was surprised that it didn't pick up more nominations. Now, A24 releasing it on like December 31st is probably the culprit here. But I will say that it was one of those movies that I saw and was curious, am I going to like this? And it's one of few movies where the pace is entirely slow throughout. Blade Runner 2049 is like that. But it is never boring. It is a steady boiler. And for that, I like it. I like it a lot. Oscar Isaac is great. It is actually probably one of his best performances. Jessica Chastain is fantastic in it as well. It has the best performance that I've seen from David Oyelowo, who is the district attorney who's kind of investigating them for their, home and heating practices, any crimes that they might be involved in, because Oscar Isaac is basically married to the daughter of a mob boss. Nice little movie. Again, I'd recommend it to anyone. Well written, well performed, looks great. It has a good trailer too. And yeah, I enjoyed it. Probably underrated, or maybe not, because I think it did really well on Netflix. People get mad when they see gangster movies like this because they don't get made that often. And when they do, they don't, blow out all expectations. This movie feels somewhat of a prelude to something that hasn't been totally realized. JC followed that up with a movie many years later, about 4 years later or so. He did Triple Frontier, which is like honestly one of the best action movies that I've seen, and it's a Netflix movie of all, with him and Ben Affleck and Charlie Hunnam and Garrett Hedlund and Pedro Pascal, and it was one that JC just only directed, and then it was written by Mark Bowl, who did the Hurt Locker. The reason that movie isn't better is because the production company who made it is not known for making great movies, and I'll just leave it at that, because hey, I'd like to work as a filmmaker someday. But I will say that's a good movie. And the next movie he hasn't done until now, and it is Craven the Hunter, which comes out in August. It was delayed a full year. Me thinks that because J.C. Chandor is the most talented director Sony has worked with in a while, of their mainline, directors, and given Madam Web came out in February, made 100 million, cost 80, but probably still lost money due to marketing and stuff. It will be far enough as possible away from Madam Web, and then when this movie comes out on Labor Day, this Craven the Hunter film by this director, it will leave a good impression. Hopefully, it might like eat it a bit because Madam Web kind of took some of the superhero goodwill, and that is coming out only a month after Deadpool, so we'll see how it goes. But I'm optimistic for that movie, even though it looks generic and kind of ugly, that because this guy, JC Chandor, is behind it, and he has such an eye in this movie, at least, it's probably his most visually compelling film, A Most Violent Year, that I think that, that it could be good. At least I hope so, because I like A Most Violent Year. Has a good quote in it. When it's scary to jump, that's exactly when you jump. Otherwise, you spend your whole life in the same place, and that I can't do. But yeah, I like it. Very watchable movie. Very likable. Number six is a movie where I watched it and I was so surprised how much I liked it. This is the follow up from the director of the Florida Project. It is Sean Baker is the director, by the way. His first movie was shot on an iPhone 5 called Tangerine, which is about prostitute tries to get money back from her pimp. And this kind of deals with somebody who's sort of it deals with sex work on the periphery as well. It's called Red Rocket. It's stars Simon Rex, who I knew previously only from Scary Movie 3, which he's hilarious in. And this was a great performance. He's playing a really seedy character, and the movie is 2 hours and 10 minutes long. I didn't feel it really at the time. It's about a guy who's an ex porn star named Mikey Saber. He decides to crawl back to his hometown of Texas City, Texas, where his estranged wife and mother in law are living. Just as this dysfunctional family seems to be making things work, Mikey meets a young woman named Strawberry working the cash register at the local donut shop. And yeah, he tries to get her into pornography, I think. I can't quite remember and how soft or hard it goes on that. But the funny thing about this movie is its tone. It's a comedy. It's tonally it's the flip side of the Florida Project, because this Florida Project was bright and sunny, but like a bit depressive. But the kids were optimistic, and then this one, um, oh, the characters are cynical. Takes place in like an industrial town and stuff, but I wouldn't say it's feel good, but it's kind of like a slice of life, isn't that funny kind of thing. I don't know. I could be totally misremembering it, but it's like kind of a goofy film. Just because it has a needle drop, as they say. I hate using that term, but featured song in it by the Backstreet Boys, which is kind of a hilarious cut. And whether people unite for, with, or against this character, I won't say. But I will say Simon Rex was great in a year where you could have basically taken him and Nicolas Cage and a great number of actors for Best Actor and replaced the Best Actor lineup, and it would have been, um, uh, arguably a better Best Actor lineup than what ended up happening, which I believe Will Smith won that year. Which I like Will Smith, but I don't like what he did, and I'll leave it at that. Yeah, Red Rocket, good movie, very sparkly. Um, I look forward to what Sean Baker does next. Heard rumblings about like what he might do. But he's likes to take his time like a lot of directors now. It feels so weird that this is like a 2021 film, because it feels like a movie that could have come before. Like I don't remember watching it as like a COVID movie. Like, I did for X or Dream Scenario or The Whale, Minari. Like I could go on about their 2020 films like Bodies, 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 and that. Iron Claw, it's well enough away, but like Low Tide feels it. Tragedy of Macbeth, same year, feels it. Um, and then the movies like Midsummer remind you of like the right before COVID, in a weird way, and then After Sun feels like, at after COVID and whatnot. I'm weird like that. Like Uncut Gems was another one, but it's like one of those weird movies where it came out basically at the right before it all. So it yeah, it's this weird thing. White Noise is another like COVID type movie. I guess I'm just not over COVID because my new era of my life has yet to begin. But yeah, it's weird. It's a very positive movie. I liked it a lot. I liked it more than I thought I did. I liked it better than the Florida Project, although the high highs of the Florida Project it doesn't quite match it. It does have a suitably strong ending, I recall. And it's weird because it's like it's a strong performance. it's well directed, has a unique visual style, but like I don't, it's a movie that's not about much. Avatar: The Way of Water is another one where I find that it like the plot is very thin, but because it's so character based, it doesn't feel like it's wasting time. So moving on to my number five movie is a movie that's like entirely character based. In fact, it's entirely Tom Hardy staring at the road as he drives down a highway, and that is Locke. And I just love the way that this movie is written, and everything that everybody tells you, which is mostly on the phone on this movie, by Stephen Knight, which he also wrote. Um, Stephen Knight, by the way, kind of an interesting director. He made Serenity, which was awful, um, and he made a ill scene Jason Statham movie. But he's made a decent career as a writer. I believe he is the architect of Peaky Blinders, and you know this movie Locke, which is just about a guy righting all the wrongs in his life and getting his life together as he drives down the road to meet the birth of his woman he had an affair with. Yeah, Stephen Knight wrote a movie called Dirty Pretty Things, which was well regarded. And Eastern Promises, which I really liked the script for, that was directed by David Cronenberg. But yeah, Knight himself, he also he's been somewhat busy. He's quite prolific as a writer. Um, he did a movie I've been meaning to watch called Pawn Sacrifice, starring Tobey Maguire, which exists entirely in Spider-Man memes. It's about Tobey Maguire playing Bobby Fischer, and just kind of the paranoid pressure that he faces. He wrote Allied. He wrote that movie Burnt, about where Bradley Cooper plays a chef that you see clips of all the time but isn't very good. He wrote Woman Walks Ahead, which I started watching and then stopped because it's like this has a great cast, but I really don't care. He wrote Girl in the Spider's Web, which I did like, dare I say, and then, famously did Serenity with McConaughey and Hathaway, which, and then Locked Down, which was Lockdown movie that Doug Lyman directed. Didn't like it. Spencer didn't like it. I got what he was doing there though, um, and yeah, he's written a lot in TV as well. Peaky Blinders, of course, and Taboo, which he did with Tom Hardy. As well, just for a season, he was a writer on the Apple TV show C. It's This guy is really like a factor. Like, Great Expectations, All the Light We Cannot See, um, and he has two things coming out this year, along with Thousand Blows, which is a British boxing drama. This guy works a lot, and out of all of that, this is his best work, and it's among Tom Hardy's best work. It's just a guy staring at a screen, staring at the windshield of a car driving down the road, trying to write his life. And it has a couple of voices in it, like Ruth Wilson is in it. Andrew Scott, who a lot of you will know as like Ripley, and he Sherlock Holmes. He played Moriarty. Olivia Colman is a voice in it. Tom Holland is a voice in it. So it's like a who's who of British folks. But 100% watchable movie. It's only 85 minutes long. It's super compelling. I recommend it. It's kind of weird because I don't like. It's one of those, I don't think of it as an A24 film at all. But like, somebody had to distribute it, and it was them. So that's what it ends up doing. There isn't really much more to say about it, only because it's like when people joke like, "Oh, I'd watch Tom Hardy read a phone book," and it's basically what you're imagining is this film. Yeah, which was distributed by A24 in the United States and done by Lionsgate. Maybe that's why I was thinking about it in the United Kingdom. But it cost 2 million, made five, was a profit. It does really well on streaming. It's a movie that, like, it is like a coworker movie, but like a good coworker movie, which is to say like your coworker probably has seen it or would recommend it or would like it, but it's like an all-around movie that you can recommend that's kind of for everybody, and I think everybody will like it, except for that odd fellow who like there's always a guy, and it doesn't matter how famous or how good or how successful the movie is, there is always a guy who's the guy that like didn't like it. And when you ask your friend, "Oh, have you seen this movie?" "I don't know, I heard it was bad." Most of the time they're making that up, but if they're not making it up, it's this guy who like just I didn't like how I thought and then they get all pretentious about it, and what they say doesn't even make any sense. And it's like, okay, you just don't like movies, or you just don't like the thing. I get it that like visually there isn't much going on here, but and it would make a perfect podcast, but yeah, it is a very, very, very solid picture. And if I could get the podcast rights to it and then just, post it on here, who knows? Maybe I do quite well for myself. Or, you know what, Stephen Knight, do that yourself. Like, just take the audio of this movie and post it on Spotify. You'll do really well. Very well. It doesn't even have to be episodic. It can be like a full-length radio play. Um, and yeah, it'll do well. Walk, good movie. Number 4 is Hereditary. This movie I saw in theaters with my brother, along with the number 3 film. He kind of dragged me to it, and I was apprehensive because it's an A24 movie, which you can tell by me just going through this list now. Their movies are not necessarily in my speed. Their ideas stick with me, but their movies are about ideas, and the entertainment is kind of secondary. Usually they back a filmmaker with like a unique vision, but like you can only do that so many times before you have to make a movie that makes money, and that's why, Civil War is coming out and doing quite well, as I mentioned at the top. But like the first film by Ari Aster, I remember it played really well at like South by Southwest or some early horror festival, and people were really looking forward to it. And they're like, "This movie is amazing and can't wait for people to watch it." And it was A24's most successful movie at the time by far. And I was just one of those, you know, one of the movies that's not on here that A24 distributed was It Comes at Night. And that was one of the movies where it to me is like the best example of a movie comes out, has a lot of hype, people watch it. Every regular person hates the movie, and the movie is all tell, no show. Nothing happens until the end. That's what I worried that this movie was. And this movie kind of perfects the formula of like horror movies where it's like it has a spidery trailer. It's very like holding its cards close to its chest until the end. The thing is that this movie has up its sleeve is that Alex Wolff is better than you would expect somebody to be in that role, just because it's like the teenager who carries a lot of the movie, shockingly. You think it's going to be about, the daughter, and then it shifts to this character, and you're kind of like, I don't really know who this guy is, but I empathize with him. And then you have Toni Collette, who is just absolutely a powerhouse in this movie. Just incredible. She should have been nominated for Best Actress, but she wasn't because it's a horror movie, and, a genre bias drives me nuts. And then, Gabriel Byrne is in there. He rounds out the cast fine as a pro. The great imagery in this movie. I wish that Ari Aster would make something commercial, because this is his most commercial movie. And like just make a movie that everybody wants to watch. I saw this in theaters, one of the few where I had a beer while watching it. Or maybe it was just my brother and I'm remembering vicariously. But we watched it and we liked it. It was pretty good. And then on Halloween one year, when I was dressed up as Free Guy, I came to my friend's house, and they were just kind of catching the end of it, and that was like me kind of going through it a bit for the second time. So again, maybe it's just with Ari Aster and it's all vibes, because I could have seen my 50th film for this list, but was afraid tonight on Paramount Plus the last few days that I have it, or Priscilla on Prime. And I didn't, because their movies are like exercise. I don't want to do it. But number three, one of their more successful films too, is Lady Bird. This is a well written, well directed, well performed movie that is very modest. Like, it's about a girl's high school life based on Greta Gerwig's own upbringing as like a Catholic schoolgirl, and it's very much like a timepiece of the '90s, and I like it. It's well done. It's well paced. It's well edited. Everything congeals. Um, the thing is that it's not like more than that. It never comes across as anything like more than modest. Like, you can kind of tell, and you can certainly tell now, that it's like Greta Gerwig on easy mode. Like, she's nailing it, and it's her upbringing. It's like, yeah, I got this story out of the way. What's next? It's funny that it was like a critical darling and was the most nominated out of all of her films, because it's actually, I mean, Barbie isn't as good as Lady Bird. Lady Bird's a better movie, but like, she made Lady Bird Best Picture nominated, a bunch of awards. She made Little Women, Best Picture nominated, not as many like Academy Awards, but a better film. And then Barbie gets like also more like, doesn't win as many Academy Awards. It is more commercially like successful, but it's just funny to me how her biggest success has been Lady Bird when it comes to the Oscars, at least. Or am I completely wrong and I'm misremembering? And Lady Bird essentially won nothing, because it feels like a movie that should have won, but it just probably got an overabundance of praise. Yeah, it earned five nominations and won none. So I'm misremembering it, because I was thinking, even as I was saying, okay, what did this movie do to the? And so this movie, what's funny is that Hereditary was 2018. 6 months before that, Lady Bird is out, and it's around Christmas, and I'm with my brother the same night I went to see Hereditary, and he's more of the filmmaking exercise. Like, he likes to exercise his filmmaking brain, and that's probably why he's a better writer than me. Um, but he wants to go see Lady Bird, and I think it's another one of those super highly rated by critics, not really liked by regular people films. So I'm like, I don't want to. So we have this fight, and my brother, because I know when movies come out, and I know when they are playing, and I know where they are playing, and if something isn't available, I usually know how to get it. I'm like a procurer of both like movies and technical objects. But basically, he's like, "Why would you tell me that it's playing locally and we can go see it, and then not allow us to go see it?" And like, we had this big fight, and I told my mom, and my mom's like, "I will pay your ticket if you want to go see this movie," because I didn't want to spend my money on it. I didn't want to spend my money on something and not enjoy it, knowing that I thought that I might not enjoy it. You know what I mean? Like, movies are an investment to me. I'm not gonna go see Civil War because I feel there's a reasonable chance I won't like it. Um, and so it's the same with the first Omen. There's a chance that I don't like it, so I won't go see it. But like with Lady Bird, my mom's like, "I'll pay your ticket. We go see it. We like it." And it's funny because I, I remember those A24 films back to back. Um, it was like that. So yeah, I enjoyed Lady Bird. Haven't seen it since. Don't need to. But it's maintained its reputation quite well. Um, I look forward to seeing more of Saoirse Ronan. Greta Gerwig, I'm sorry that you have to do those Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe movies, because I mean, I know I'm Catholic and it's a Catholic series, but man, I did not like the first movie. I never saw the second. I didn't see the third, but like, I was, why the Christianity, and so like, just followed the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and it got all these like great reviews. It sucked. It sucked. I'm not interested in that fantasy world at all. I don't care about the characters. I remember getting the book read to me in like fifth grade, and she only got halfway through it before like, we gave up, and we kind of lost where we were on it. I didn't like it. I don't get why people like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So it just sucks that we're losing talented directors like Greta Gerwig to these like major franchises that will take up essentially their entire filmmaking career. And what's funny is Greta is the exception because like if you see her at roundtables and stuff, it's like what movies do you want to make? They're movies like Barbie, like they're well made, popular movies that everyone likes. She wants to make those movies. She's essentially the Spielberg heir, um, and with like the writing craftsmanship of Jordan Peele. Except like, imagine if you combine Jordan Peele and Steven Spielberg. That's who Greta Gerwig kind of is because all three of her movies have been nominated for Best Picture. All of them have been financial successes. All of them have been well reviewed by critics, and all of them, although you could argue Barbie, but who cares, have been like well accepted by audiences. Greta Gerwig, no qualifier, full stop, is the most successful debuting director. And if you go punch for punch, even with like Steven Spielberg, nobody came out of the gate like Greta Gerwig. Her first movie was an indie success. Her second movie was a blockbuster success. Her third movie was an uber blockbuster success. And every single one of them was Oscar nominated for Best Picture. And she was nominated for a screenplay for every one of them. She should have won screenplay for Little Women, which, by the way, was my favorite of all the 2019 movies, which I didn't expect to like, but did. And instead, they gave it to Taika Waititi for, Jojo Rabbit. Don't like that movie at all. Well, I mean, I don't hate it. It's fine, but like, they gave it best original screenplay or adapted screenplay because it's an outlandish premise, but like, man, like in terms of like actual writing, punch for punch, Greta Gerwig's screenplay for Little Women is good, and Lady Bird is good too because she, in her screenplays, has a good mix of like comedy, which doesn't feel forced, like it doesn't feel like the writer making a point. All feels like natural dialogue. The characters feel rooted and real people. And this is just an overall well done film you can recommend to somebody. The Laurie Metcalf of it all, and I hate saying the blank of it all because it's kind of become a thing that people say on podcasts, but the her performance is a bit overpraised. She's good in it, but she's always good in like everything. And it's just I don't know if people of that generation hadn't seen their mother represented on screen or something before. My mother isn't like that, but like that's what people seem to gravitate to critics wise. They seem to like that the most, which is I think in retrospect kind of hurt it. I don't know. A24 is interesting in their distribution strategies because they're always very experimentally minded. They limit their liability and exposure on a lot of films. So they're almost all, if their hits are sleeper hits, except for, of course, Civil War, which I would say is a hit. Like, the people are like, oh, it's going to be an uphill battle to profitability. No, it won't. Okay? The studio themselves is valued at over $1 billion, and the movie was number one. It was their first number one. That's all they had to do. Made over 25 million. Even if it like collapses, I believe it'll make at least 50 million. And you have downstream revenues, which studios are starting to figure out. Like with going to premium video on demand quicker, that's where it shows up, and it's like $20 to rent rather than $5 or $6.95 as I pay. The studios are starting to figure out the new economics of it, which COVID shifted. Personally, I hate it because it leads to shortened windows, and it's like, okay, well, why would I go see Dune in March when I know it's going to come out in May? And it's like, well, how badly do you want to see Dune? And I digress. Greta Gerwig has had success. She's off to making big movies. She likely won't do an A24 again for some time. But, this company at least has cultivated a lot of interesting filmmakers. And Number two, you probably knew this was coming, The Zone of Interest. This is a movie which, by a lesser filmmaker, would be boring. By a lesser filmmaker would also be in black and white and 4:3. This is a movie about how we live now, presented through yesterday. And it finds a new take on World War II, the most overdone genre in movies. And it manages to make a premise which is like, what about the Nazis? What if they were your next door neighbor? And it presents them in life in all its mundanity. Mundanity? I don't know how to say that. I know the word's mundane, but mundanity is, I know that's a word, but it's one of those I've only seen written. Give me a break. Um, the Zone of Interest. Interesting movie. Every single shot feels purposeful. Every single line of dialogue is like minimal but purposeful. The sound is the entire thing, which is why it won for best sound. It also won for best international film. Really deserved. I maintain that if the Oscars had gone on until now, there's a chance that people might have gotten sick of Oppenheimer, and enough people would have seen Zone of Interest that it probably would have won more Oscars, because everything about this movie feels pristine and presented exactly the way that it should be. It will be a film that it will be looked on as a masterpiece. Um, I didn't find it boring at all, even though nothing happens in the movie. That's what everybody tells you. Why is it that a movie where nothing happens, which so many movies on this list do, they have a movies of like this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and they all get it wrong. They're all boring. They all bore you. Why? Because they're not cinema often enough. This movie, the sound is important. The visuals are important. The themes are important. And they all work together so wonderfully that you are reminded of what good filmmaking can be. Again, a movie where it's just people walking around a house for 2 hours, or in this case, actually, it's 105 minutes, but it can feel a lot longer in a good way. They, um, how do I say it? They do it in a way that, because they work so well, all the people who worked on this movie, which changes actually quite a bit from the novel, I'm told, everything works in concert so well that you're reminded of like, oh, this is what a good movie should be. They should all do this. And you're like, why can't every movie be as good as this? Because this movie is just about following people around a house. It's probably has rewatch value because, there's a lot you miss due to the sound, or, you're kind of lost in thoughts and trying to think about where it's going. It's a movie I think I will watch again, although, it might end up on like TV for 5 minutes and then I'll watch part of it, and then as soon as I watch a movie on TV, like The Lost World is a good example, I will like never watch that through beginning to end again. Once you watch a piece of a movie on television, it's like in your head, oh, it's always on TV, so I don't need to buy it or anything. And that's basically what ends up happening with me. Although, truth be told, I only own like less than 20 movies. So, would I buy any of these? No. Will I buy any of these? Maybe number one. And number one will be hard for you to guess. Unless you really like it, I wonder if anybody listening to this list will be like, when's Green Room coming on? When's Green Room? Is Green Room going to be on the list? Is he going to? Green Room is my number one. And it's so fascinating because my top four, Hereditary is about paganism. Lady Bird is about Catholicism. The Zone of Interest is about Nazism. And this one is also about Nazism in a fun way because you're fighting Nazis. It's One Way In, One Way Out, directed by Jeremy Saulnier. It's 95 minutes in and out. A punk rock band becomes trapped in a secluded venue after finding a scene of violence. For what they saw, the band themselves become targets of violence from a gang of white power skinheads who want to eliminate all evidence of the crime. Yeah, it's basically about scraping by a punk rock band. Takes a desperate job at the end, somewhere in the south of United States, probably. And they decide to play for their last song, Nazi Punks F Off. And the movie just basically goes from there. It's like Assault on Precinct style of like people locked into a room and there's violence. It's very mean, very sharp violence. It doesn't wince at all. You can tell a director is very good by the way they present violence in a way that is consequential. You know, people go on and I talk about like the movies I like are action movies, but I like violence to have consequences, and Quentin Tarantino will talk you to death about this. But like violence should have meaning, but in having meaning, it's for showing it for what it is. It can be too shocking or too gross or turn people off. But then if you go the other way, then it's like too plastic, too fake, and too meaningless. This movie finds like a happy medium between it, and it's just like a great metal movie. I like it a lot. My dad likes it a lot. It's an interesting, like, when you find an auteur who knows what they're doing, but they also like know how to kick ass. Like, most of the time, the people who know the ABCs of filmmaking want to use those ABCs to like write a letter. Um, you know, I find that if you take somebody who knows their filmmaking ABCs and have them make like a Hollywood picture or, something big and broad, and it's the theme that I've been hitting on about A24 this whole time, which you'll probably roll your eyes at. But like, if somebody knows the filmmaking grammar, they will make the most interesting action movie possible because they know already the dramatics of what they're supposed to do. So they'll present that in an efficient way, and then they'll show you action in a way that is like meaningful and interesting. And that's what I want in my movies. And Green Room, it's not like the heaviest movie on this list. It's probably one of the lighter ones in terms of like themes and stuff. But it is just a tense, mean, good time watching the movies. It left me feeling the most satisfied for like what I watched out of all the movies on here. Uh, the Zone of Interest masterpiece, but it's emotionally inert. Um, Ladybird is like all emotion, but I feel like somebody just recounted a story to me. Hereditary has like interesting films and horrific imagery, but it's a tad disjointed. Locke is a fascinating story told, but that's what it is. It's just told. Most Violent Year is all of that, but it's too slight. Obvious Child is a story you wouldn't hear that often, but it's a small story. And then Red Rocket is a character piece. I can go on about the top 10. Like Spectacular Now is good, but it's far too nostalgic. Dream Scenario is an interesting exercise, but it's just an exercise. The Green Room feels like visually very good. It's very strong. It's in the genre on which I love, and it is made by somebody who is working at the top of their game. And I, for one, wish Jeremy Saulnier, after doing Blue Ruin and Green Room and Hold the Dark, which he did afterwards, which, by the way, has the best police shootout I have ever seen. It takes place in the Alaskan winter. It's a bit too long. It's about Jeffrey Wright, who is like a wolf tracker and a naturalist. He hunts for wolves, blamed for like killing a local boy, but he finds himself swept into like a chilling mystery of like with the boy's parents, who one of which is like uh, played by Alexander Skarsgård, who's like a soldier, and Riley Keough is the mother, and she's interesting in that movie. That's probably my favorite Riley Keough role. And James Badgedale as the sheriff. It has the coolest shootout that I've seen. That is just so absolutely devastating. Like the top comment on YouTube is like, this is what happens when you have cops who don't know how to deal with like an experienced shooter. Like this guy knows, like the YouTube commenter is aware. Like, do we expect this YouTube commenter was on like the police force and knows firsthand how to deal with like a shooter that requires like a SWAT team to get down? No, but that's a badass scene, and Jeremy Saulnier is like the king of the B movie, and he's right up my alley. I love directors who know the cinematic language but prefer action movies. um, S. Craig Zoller kind of tiptoes onto that list, and they're both kind of following in the steps of Tarantino. But and I'm not even the biggest Tarantino fan, but I love movies that speak the cinematic language. And I love it when, that you really feel like you've gotten a meal out of it. So that's my list of top 49 A24 films. The next movies that I will see will probably be. I'll watch Beau is Afraid because I've been meaning to watch that movie, knowing that I won't like it, but it's like homework. Um, I'll watch Beau is Afraid. I'll watch Priscilla. I'm prepared to enjoy it more because I liked Sofia Coppola's movie. Not Marie Antoinette. I don't like that movie, and I didn't see The Bling Ring, although that's on my list. That's an A24 film. But Priscilla. Um, I feel I'll like that better, maybe, because I really like The Beguiled. So I'm kind of like looking forward to that. Somewhere I started watching, I'm like, this movie is so boring, waste my time. But that's what you get with Nepo babies. They don't have to try. But Sofia Coppola, she's made a career for herself. Good for her. Roman Coppola, who I think is her brother. I know it's Francis's son. He's been Oscar nominated. Somebody said he had a bad career, and it's like, no, he's co-writing Wes Anderson movies. He's making the movies he wants. Like, that's a career, He's making stuff. And then Francis, of course, is coming out with his first movie in years since Tetro, or Twixt, if you count that, which got changed every time it got shown, is Megalopolis, and that's competing at Cannes. Um, Imagine if A24 took that movie. That is going to be like a hard movie to promote, although I'd know how to promote it. You just list how many Oscars that Francis has won, which is more than like anybody. Say that he did Godfather 1 and 2, and then, list the Oscar winners in it or something, or, list them as like Adam Driver is, it's kind of like you can be tactful about it. And again, you're not paying for the whole movie. He already financed it himself, all 100 million or 120 million of it to make his wines. Good for him, you know. That's what filmmaking is about. It's about betting on yourself, telling stories which only you can tell. And that's what all these movies are. None of these movies would ever be a Hollywood movie. Spectacular Now probably would have been sanded down a bit more. Lady Bird would have been softened. Green Room would have been like a straight to video movie, which had less money going against it. So, you know, that's what I say. X would have been like the movie of its era, exploitative. Room again, probably. Who knows if it would have been softened or not? That's like the one thing that they do. But I will say, like, all of these movies have somewhat influenced culture. Um, Even Come On, I guess. Just because adding to the chorus of like pointless black and white movies and showing Joaquin Phoenix as like a regular guy who is also kind of like a hippie. But like, yeah, they all of these movies have something to say at least, and they all contribute something. And at the end of the day, filmmaking is a net positive for these movies having been made. So, I'm happy that A24 films, even though they aren't all my style, they all say something unique that demonstrate the gifts of their filmmakers. And it's because they made these movies that a lot of these filmmakers can go on to make, you know, if not better than more successful movies. Like Greta Gerwig, after making this, made Little Women, which is fantastic. And then, Barbie, which was very successful. Ari Aster is kind of stuck with the studio. Um, and then, Ty West is releasing Maxine. I think that's going to be a bigger hit. The creators of Mississippi Grind went on to make Captain Marvel. That was a huge hit. Yorgos Lanthimos again did Poor Things, won a bunch of Oscars, along with The Favorite. He's going on to do Kinds of Kindness, which comes out in June. I think, even though it's an anthology series, I think it'll be pretty decent. Lee Isaac Chung, who made Minari, went on. He's doing Twisters this year. Um, Noah Baumbach is hilariously like tagging along with Greta Gerwig, his girlfriend. Um, and Ben Wheatley was going to do Tomb Raider, and then he did the Meg 2, which is kind of funny of him to do. Um, Sean Durkin, I'm sure after doing Iron Claw, will come out and do something next. And then, I'm sure Lulu Wang after Expats will she'll probably do like a Marvel or superhero film or something like that. Um, Barry Jenkins is doing the Mufasa movie. Yikes! And I look forward to Joel Cohen. He's kind of coming back to doing a movie with his brother, which is cool. And then you kind of have people like I look forward to Benjamin Caron, who directed Sharper. I look forward to what this guy does next. I know he'd done like a Sherlock episode and stuff, but yeah. One of the Safdie brothers is reuniting with The Rock for a UFC movie. Um, David Robert Mitchell is kind of going back to the well of It Follows with It Follows 2. And then the Daniels who did Everything Everywhere. I'm not sure what they're doing next. I will say their music video for Simple Song by The Shins is my favorite work of theirs. And then, follow-ups like Talk to Me and whatnot. But my point being is that, like, A24 is a net positive, and I don't like all of their films. And in fact, I kind of have a knee-jerk reaction when I see it of like, oh, they're making a film that I won't like. But film in the cinema landscape are a net positive because of them. So that was my ranking. If you didn't enjoy it, I mean, thanks for listening. If you did enjoy it, give me a like and follow. I'm FilmGamer pretty much across all platforms. If you don't find FilmGamer or, film_gamer on Instagram, then you can just go to my website, filmgamer.com. My socials are all listed on there. And yeah, this was season 3, episode 19, 26 overall. Thank you for listening. This was a marathon of an episode, but I wouldn't be able to do it without you. And give me suggestions. I already have a guest lined up for one of my future episodes. He's a filmmaker himself, Griffin Penny, or Penne. It's not penne because that's like a type of pasta. But yeah, people, if you're Italian, you're named after pastas. But yeah, anyway, either way, his name sounds good. Griffin Penne, Griffin Penny, Griffin Penny. I like Griffin Penny. It does sound like a filmmaker, doesn't it? I worked with him on a project in development called People of Kingstown, which you can look forward to seeing. I'll ask him about it. But yeah, we'll talk about AI, and that'll be in the future. So I'm not sure if I will do the next weekend box office so soon. Again, I'm still trying to experiment on what the best day of the week is to release a lot of these pods. And again, April is just so boring for the box office. The strikes, let me tell you, the writers and actors strikes really hampered the pipeline of film development to where The Fall Guy is the movie that's opening in May. The big movie that kicks off the summer. It is kind of like a mid-budget movie, 120 million. I mean, that's a sizable budget, but it's, I don't know. It looks like a movie that could have been made for 60 million. Is the thing. It just stars Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt, but because there were the dual strikes, the Marvel movies weren't ready, which usually occupy that date. And so we have that, and we have a couple of okay movies that I'm sort of looking forward to. I mean, I'm looking forward to Twisters, but yeah, the strikes have put a pin on the development of a lot of movies and such. We have this pool that we gotta wade through of like lukewarm, high wasted water, and we can't dive into anything yet because the pool is very shallow. Anyway, that's enough mixing metaphors. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Film Gamer podcast. It's brought to you by me, Will Hume. If you want to give me suggestions, shout out to me at FilmGamer1 on Twitter or at FilmGamer Streams Facebook page. Or, I don't know, shout at me on the street or text me or friend me on Facebook or something. There are ways. So, thanks for listening.